I attended Chairman Oxley's funeral on behalf of the committee and expressed our sincere condolences to his family. As a committee, we continue to honor his service and his memory, especially for those of us who had the honor of serving with him in the House, and remember his gentle nature, remember his leadership, remember his bipartisan work. Chairman Oxley was a mentor to many, a class act, and is certainly missed. Again, I have ordered that his portrait be draped in black swag as you observe. This is an honor customarily bestowed upon former speakers of the House. It is my understanding this is the first time such a display has been done for a chairman's portrait. Again, Chairman Oxley was a great friend to many of us, and it is a testament to the esteem in which we hold him. I think it is a fitting remembrance for our former chairman that he received this symbol of respect. And I would now ask all members to observe a moment of silence in honor of Chairman Mike Oxley. Chair will now recognize himself for an opening statement. 3 weeks ago, we heard President Obama deliver his last State of the Union address, and perhaps never has there been a greater disconnect between the American people and their president. President Obama may spend his last year in office trying to take a victory lap, but the American people are taking no victory lap in their household finances. The undeniable truth is the economy still isn't working for working Americans. They remain stuck in the slowest, weakest economic recovery of their lifetimes. Median household incomes, tragically today, is $1,600 lower than it was when the president took office. Because the economy is underperforming by historic standards, 16 million Americans are still unemployed or underemployed, even though the recession theoretically officially ended nearly 7 years ago. The number includes 6 million Americans who are forced to work at part-time jobs because no other work is available. In fact, the number of long-term unemployed Americans is 761,000 higher than it was at the start of the recession. During the Obama administration, we've also accumulated more debt than we did in our nation's first 200 years. For anyone trying to determine what the Obama legacy will be, just look at the rapidly spinning debt clocks displayed to our left and our right, in front and center. There it is. Under President Obama, publicly held debt has more than doubled. And when measured as a percentage of the economy, gross federal debt has grown from 68% to over 103% by the end of 2014. This level of debt is the highest at any time during our nation's history other than World War II. Back then, it was temporary in a response to a mortal threat. Today's debt is structural, unsustainable, and I would offer immoral. It is stolen from our children and grandchildren, represents a mortal threat to our future. With debt on a steeply upward climb rather than a downward path, the Congressional Budget Office reports that Americans will be condemned to even slower economic growth over the next 25 years. For young Americans starting out today, our growing debt represents $250,000 in lost income over the course of their careers. Again, $250,000. That's money they'll never be able to use to send their children to college, buy a home, create a job, or pay for rising health insurance premiums thanks to Obamacare. For our nation, this ticking time bomb threatens our ability to sustain a functioning and financially viable safety net for our truly needy. It leaves little room for important priorities such as national defense. We must change course because the status quo leads only to debt and decline. Indeed, while we will probably hear some on this committee claim victory over the deficit, as President Obama did during his speech, the truth is our deficit is growing. The Associated Press reported just a few days ago, quote, "The deficit and debt picture over the long term has worsened considerably," unquote, and the economy will grow at a slower pace than budget forecasters predicted just a few months ago. Some try to portray any alternative to the status quo as austerity and pain when actually it is the opposite. Austerity and pain are what await us if we continue down the current path of more and more deficit spending. If If we keep spending money we don't have, then someday soon a future president and future Congress will be left with no choice but austerity, massive tax increases, and massive cuts to the social safety net. Instead, we must preempt all austerity and pain by getting back to a healthy economy with greater growth, greater opportunity, and prosperity for all Americans. And the best way to do that is to work together on a plan that is responsible and offers positive solutions that address our economic and fiscal challenges. So today, we will work on our committee views and estimates. They will help our committee and help the Budget Committee guide our efforts to help low and middle income Americans pursue happiness and achieve the American dream of financial independence. As we confront this task, we do so with the knowledge that it is neither fair nor compassionate to saddle future generations with ruinous debt. It's neither fair nor compassionate to continue spending money we don't have, for that ultimately makes it impossible to support the safety net for those who truly need it. The answer is prosperity, not austerity. That's how we can help create a more secure and confident America.
Yes.
At this time, I recognize the ranking member for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for convening this markup of the committee's views and estimates on the budget for fiscal year 2017. Indeed, this work is very important, as our committee has jurisdiction over very important issues of consumer and investor protection, financial stability, and a number of programs critical to the health and well-being of our nation's most vulnerable individuals. The majority's views paint a very dire picture of our budget situation, once again suggesting that we're on the verge of fiscal ruin. This grim description completely ignores the significant progress that has been made since the depths of the financial crisis, progress that is all the more remarkable given that during the last month of the Bush administration, our economy lost more than 800,000 jobs. Despite the long shadow cast by the 2008 crisis and continuing global challenges, the American economy continues to make significant gains. Indeed, for 70 consecutive months, more than 14 million private sector jobs have been created. To put it simply, the years of 2014 and 2015 mark the two strongest years of job creation since the close of the last Democratic administration from 1998 to 2000. And we have seen similar progress in the decline of long-term unemployment, growth of our gross domestic product, and gains in home prices in many areas of the country that have been devastated by the foreclosure crisis. However, despite this progress, Democrats on this committee agree that significant economic challenges still linger. The fruits of our recovery have not been shared broadly enough, and too many of our families still suffer. Across both urban and rural communities nationwide, we continue to see far too many individuals and families suffer needlessly in poverty. In my own district, the city of Los Angeles experienced a 20% increase in homelessness since 2014 and a 7% increase in veterans' homelessness. In a country as wealthy as the United States, this level of deep unmet need is simply unconscionable. While we agree on the nature of these problems, where we differ from the majority's views is on what's needed to solve them. Democrats believe that the federal government plays an indispensable role in supporting the middle class, whether through ensuring continued access to the affordable 30-year fixed-rate mortgage, advancing diversity and inclusion within the financial services sector, or helping American exporters and workers thrive in the face of an increasingly competitive global landscape. And Democrats likewise believe that the federal government can and should help ameliorate our nation's far too devastating levels of poverty by ensuring that all Americans have access to safe, decent, and affordable housing. We cannot simply tell our state and local governments and nonprofit partners to keep providing more services with fewer resources. Finally, we're committed to holding regulators accountable to fully implementing the Dodd-Frank Act by ensuring that our largest and most complex financial firms can be resolved without taxpayer assistance. Indeed, it is well past time that the Federal Reserve and the FDIC require large, complex firms to either prove that they are resolvable under ordinary bankruptcy or else reduce their footprint in the market. Unfortunately, the budget views and estimates presented by the majority would take us in exactly the wrong direction, essentially telling middle-class and lower-income Americans that they have got to go it alone and offering no plan to eliminate the risk posed to the financial system by our largest financial institutions. Democrats will today offer an alternative view which recognizes our nation's commitment to building a strong middle class, supporting the most vulnerable among us, and ensuring financial stability. Mr. Chairman, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlelady yields back. Now, pursuant to notice, I call up the committee print of the proposed budget views and estimates. The clerk will report the committee print, which was distributed in advance.
Views and estimates of the Committee on Financial Services on matters to be set forth in the concurrent resolution.
Without objection, the committee print is considered read and open to amendment at any point. As a matter of simple housekeeping, it has been brought to my attention that there is a technical correction to be made to a bill citation in the OFR section of our document. With that, I would ask unanimous consent that the bill name and title on page 3, line 34, be changed to read, quote, H.R. 3340, the Financial Stability Oversight Council Reform Act, unquote. Without objection, so ordered. Who seeks recognition?
Mr. Chairman?
What purpose does the gentleman from Virginia seek recognition?
I have an amendment at the desk that is in the name of Chairman Garrett, and he's not here, but I'd like to take that up for him.
The amendment needs to be in the name of the gentleman from Virginia. I ask unanimous consent that the amendment be styled from the gentleman from Virginia as opposed to the gentleman from New Jersey without objection. We'll pause for a moment and allow the amendment to be distributed. The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mr. Hurt on page 5, beginning on line 6, strike the SEC can also spend up to and add the following.
Without objection, the reading of the amendment is dispensed with, and the gentleman is recognized on his amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, this amendment deals with, go to page 5, line 6 of the budget views and estimates. The purpose of this amendment is to accurately state the legal spending authority that the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, has in its reserve, or has with regard to its reserve fund. Apparently there was some confusion in preparing the document as it relates to the spending authority as originally allowed in the Dodd-Frank Act and then subsequently interpreted by CBO and then subsequently modified by the omnibus that was adopted in December. Again, if you go to line 6 on page 5, this is simply a technical amendment that reflects that there is a reduction in that spending authority by 25%, and it should be, instead of $75 million, that figure should be $50 million, and the language that follows is adjusted accordingly. This, again, is simply a technical amendment to accurately reflect the spending authority as modified by the omnibus passed in December, and it's my hope that the committee will adopt this technical amendment. Thank you. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Is there any further debate on the amendment? Not. The question now occurs on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Virginia. All those in favor shall signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed shall signify by saying nay. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes appear to have it. The ayes have it, and the amendment is adopted. Does the gentlelady from Ohio seek recognition? For what purpose does the gentlelady from Ohio seek recognition?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. Move to strike the last word. Oh, I'm sorry, I have an amendment at the desk.
We'll pause a moment and allow the amendment to be distributed.
I was not clear. Okay. Goodness, Dad. I just do what they tell.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mrs. Beatty. On page 14, after line 30, add the following
Without
new
objection, the
section.
reading of the amendment is dispensed with. The gentlelady from Ohio is recognized on her amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ranking Member Waters. This is a straightforward amendment. This amendment simply has language that we're in support of efforts that are already existing with the Office of Technical Assistance to help them strengthen the ministries of finance and to also create a more effective tax policy. And basically how this came about is I have the second largest Somalian population in the country. And certainly as I have been meeting with them, many of them are small business owners, they're individuals who have dollars that they want to send back home. Unfortunately, sometimes you have good actors and you have bad actors mixed together. So we have been working with the Office of Technical Assistance, and they are in support of our amendment, which simply states that we want to support their efforts and have a government that builds effective public financial institutions and maintains effective oversight of private institutions so they can become a valuable partner in the global efforts that we are putting forth. So it's very simple. It's an amendment with supportive language to what already exists.
Gentlelady yields back.
I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlelady yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from North Carolina seek recognition?
Strike the last word.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to address the committee in support of the Beatty Amendment. Tomorrow, the Task Force to Investigate Terrorism Financing will hold a hearing on trade-based money laundering. As the witnesses for tomorrow's hearing will note, developing nations will often have weak financial sectors. These sectors are ripe for exploitation by a variety of criminals, including terrorists. Often, the financial sectors of these countries are so weak, the U.S. banks are reluctant to handle even legitimate wire remittances sending money into the country. Somalia serves as a great example of this scenario, as was pointed out. The Treasury Department's Office of Technical Assistance has a track record of building capacity in such countries. Assisting these countries allows safety and security for legitimate wire transfers and develops capacities to stem the flow of money to criminals and terrorists. For that reason, the committee should concur with the purpose of this amendment and should accept it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the ranking member seek recognition?
Move to strike the last word.
Gentlelady is recognized for 5 minutes.
I move to strike the last word to speak in support of the amendment offered by the gentlelady from Ohio, Mrs. Beatty. The gentlelady's amendment is straightforward and, if adopted, would provide appropriate recognition of the important and often overlooked work that Treasury's Office of Technical Assistance does in building institutional capacity in developing fragile countries around the globe. While the type of assistance provided by Treasury's Office of Technical Assistance covers everything from strengthening debt management to promoting robust financial sector supervision, I'm particularly pleased that the gentlelady's amendment emphasizes the important role that our technical assistance advisors play in the development and implementation of anti-money laundering and counter-terrorist financing regimes that meet international standards. I've long been a champion of efforts to strengthen our own government's vigilance in preventing terrorist groups and drug money launderers from exploiting weaknesses in our own financial system, and have been critical of banks that willfully break the law. In fact, I recently introduced legislation that would provide important new tools to help strengthen the deterrent value of our counterterrorism financing framework and hold financial sector executives accountable if they fail to implement appropriate safeguards. In addition to strengthening our own efforts here in the United States, I also recognize, as the amendment before us today appropriately does as well, that without effective partners abroad, we will never make the kind of progress that is necessary to block the movement of funds that are used in carrying out horrific acts of terror. The tragic acts of violence carried out by the San Bernardino shooters just 2 months ago, and the savage acts of violence in Paris, across the Middle East, and Africa before that, serve as pressing reminder that few issues could be more important than building public sector institutions with strong capacities to counter the terrorist threats we face. For these reasons, I urge members to adopt the gentlewoman's amendment and yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlelady yields back. Chair recognizes himself. I just wish to again remind all members that we are here for a budget views and estimates markup. Action on our annual views and estimates document is compelled by Clause 4F of Rule 10 of the Standing Rules of the House and Section 301D of the Congressional Budget Act of '74. Clause 4F1 of House Rule 10 states in part, quote, each standing committee shall submit to the Committee on the Budget its views and estimates with respect to all matters, to an estimate of the total amounts of new budget authority to be provided or authorized in all bills and resolutions within its jurisdiction that it intends to be effective during that fiscal year. Section 301D of the Congressional Budget Act has similar language. Just to remind all members, the context of the markup has to do with budgetary impact. I'm not sure that the amendment from the gentlelady from Ohio strictly meets that test. There is a question of germaneness, but I am not going to insist on the point for, among other reasons. I tend to agree with the substance of the gentlelady's amendment, but I do wish to remind all members with similar amendments that there is also our oversight plan, and some amendments may prove not to be germane if they don't actually deal with budgetary impact. But I agree with the gentlelady from Ohio, and certainly the gentleman who serves as vice chair of our terrorism finance task force, that this department deserves recognition. It is important in what it does, and I will not insist on the germaneness point and urge members to adopt the amendment. I yield back.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chair.
Who seeks recognition? Well, I tell you what, I don't yield back. I will yield to the gentlelady from Ohio.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for that statement. Would it help if I inserted language, because the Office of Technical Assistance also has a statement in there relative to the budget, that Secretary Liu has made it a priority to double the budget of the Office of Technical Assistance, which could be helpful to us in doing what we want to do under that financial arm?
Well, reclaiming my time, were the amendment to be drafted in an original form, that would be more helpful. But again, I'm not insisting on the germaneness point. I'm prepared to take the amendment as it exists. I now yield back the balance of my time. For what purposes the gentleman from Massachusetts seek recognition?
Move to strike the last word.
Gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do want to thank you for the courtesy you extended to former Chairman Oxley. Mike Oxley was a good and decent man. He was a chairman when I first came to Congress, and I was a little surprised that he invited me to his office when I first came here and wanted to find out what my priorities were on the committee. Now, I'm not sure if he was doing that to block them or to help them along, but he certainly was certainly very kind, and I think it's a wonderful gesture in his honor that you've draped his portrait, and thank you as well for attending the wake on behalf of and his funeral on behalf of the full committee. really appreciate that. I do want to speak in behalf briefly of the gentlelady from Ohio's amendment. I think it's entirely appropriate, and I support it 100%. I actually served with Mr. Pittenger on the task force that you created, Mr. Chairman, and I associate myself with the remarks of the gentleman from North Carolina. The Office of Technical Assistant provides great support to our folks in Treasury that operate in the Middle East and all those countries where we are trying to prevent terrorists from accessing the legitimate financial system. And I think the gentlelady from Ohio, her amendment amplifies that fact. And I do think there is some place in this process where we might enhance the budgetary support that we provide for the Office of Technical Assistance. And with that, I thank you for the time, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Is there any further debate on the amendment? If not, the question now occurs on the amendment offered by the gentlelady from Ohio. All those in favor shall signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed shall signify by saying nay. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The ayes have it, and the amendment is adopted. Who seeks recognition? For what purpose does the ranking member seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
We will pause and allow the amendment to be distributed.
Mm-hmm.
This language is taken directly from our views. It just replaces their critical.
Have all members, is there any member who has not received a copy of the amendment? So the clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Ms. Waters. On page 3, strike line through 40 and replace with the following: Financial Stability Oversight Council and Office of Financial Research. The Office of Financial Research was created
Without objection,
by
the reading of the amendment is dispensed with, and the ranking member is recognized on her amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's hard to believe that this bears repeating, but some of my colleagues on the opposite side of the aisle seem to need reminding that in 2008, our economy was brought to its knees. The financial crisis caused the greatest loss of wealth in a generation. The economy lost nearly $16 trillion in household wealth, $13 trillion in economic growth, and 9 million jobs. In the lead up to the crisis, nobody in the private sector or in government was looking at the stability of our financial system as a whole. Nobody was looking at the big picture, and nobody had the responsibility to deal with emerging threats before they caused damage to our economy. To address these failures, the Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform Act created the Financial Stability Oversight Council and the Office of Financial Research. Fast forward to present day, the unemployment rate is down to 5%. The deficit has been reduced by $1 trillion, and over 14 million new jobs have been created over 70 straight months. The simple fact is that Wall Street reform works, and we have seen it work particularly well with the Financial Stability Oversight Council, or FSOC. Prior to Dodd-Frank, our regulators were too often caught in silos, not communicating with one another, and not considering gaps between their agencies or interconnectedness within the financial sector. Even worse, we saw too many cases where regulators were captured by the very entities that they were meant to police. FSOC is successfully filling that void, looking at every aspect of our financial system for possible weaknesses. It serves as an advanced warning system to identify and address systemic risk posed by large, complex companies, products, and activities before they threaten the economy. For the first time, we can feel confident that our financial regulators are working collaboratively to identify and respond to emerging threats to financial stability. To date, FSOC has designated 4 institutions for enhanced prudential supervision. This enhanced oversight is now causing some large non-bank financial companies to consider whether simplifying their structures and breaking themselves up might provide better value to their shareholders. Another success story is the Office of Financial Research, or OFR. OFR helps to promote financial stability by performing essential research on the financial system. The OFR provides invaluable support to the FSOC by acting as its research arm, providing analyses of emerging risk and collecting and standardizing financial data. The work of the FSOC and the OFR is central to ensuring we avoid the types of risks that nearly brought down our economy just a few years ago. This amendment simply highlights the importance of their work, and I urge my colleagues to adopt it. I'll yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. It seeks recognition. For what purpose does the gentleman from Missouri seek recognition?
Strike last word.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The lady's amendment discusses the greatness of FSOC here, which anybody who's been watching what goes on and has been listening to the discussion within our own committee knows that there are grave concerns about FSOC, how it's going about its business, whether it's actually doing the job it needs to do with regards to designating systemically important financial institutions and also its review of other activities. It has been created to look at the different exposures that are out there with regards to the financial institutions and their activities. And yet, when we have them in front of us and discuss with us their intentions and their activities, when they start talking about SIFIs, they can't even give us an off-ramp as to what's going on. So when we start discussing FSOC in glowing terms here, I have some real concerns about a basic understanding of the concept of what FSOC is supposed to be doing and how they're doing it. So I certainly do not support the lady's amendment, Mr. Chairman, and with that I yield back.
Would you yield to the chairman?
I yield, yes, sir.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. I would like to urge members to reject this amendment. Certainly, I second everything that the gentleman from Missouri had to say. With respect to the OFR and FSOC both, these are agencies that desperately need to be brought on to the budget. At some point, Congress has to quit outsourcing the power of the purse to these outside agencies. We lose the accountability on behalf of the American people. I know the gentleman from Minnesota, particularly with respect to OFR, has offered a bill to ensure that they are put on budget, which I think is incredibly important. Again, this is foundational to in our republic. In Article 1 of the Constitution, that we retain the power of the purse, and we have yielded it. We, Congresses, over many decades, have been yielding it increasingly to agencies. I think it's a very bad precedent. I think it's a very bad trend, and it's time that the United States Congress reclaim the power of the purse. And a good place to start right here is with respect to OFR. So the language that is in the budget views and estimates dealing with OFR, I would urge members to accept that and reject the amendment of the ranking member, and I thank the gentleman from Missouri for yielding.
I yield balance of time to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Nagarwar.
I thank the gentleman, and I want to associate myself with the chairman's and Mr. Lukemar's remarks as well. One is that this is worded strangely because it says on page 3, strike line through 40. I'm not sure. I guess who's going to do line 1 through 40. But the other thing is what the chairman is saying is that somehow we think around here when somebody's collecting fees from users, that's free money, and so there should not be any accountability for that. And that, quite honestly, that's one of the reasons that we have we have now $19 trillion in debt. And, the only way that, one of the responsibilities that Congress has is oversight. And one of the ways that we have oversight is through the budgetary process. And to somehow start pushing these entities like OFR and CFPB off of congressional oversight is not in the best interest of the people that we serve. And so I associate myself with the two gentlemen and would encourage people not to support the gentlewoman's amendment. Yield back to the gentleman from Missouri.
Gentleman from Missouri, yield back.
Yield back.
Gentleman yields back. For what purposes, gentleman from Massachusetts seek recognition?
Strike the last word.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Very briefly, Mr. Chairman, I won't need that time, but I would like to ask for unanimous consent that I might be added as an original co-sponsor of the gentlelady from California's amendment.
Without objection.
Thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Who seeks recognition? If there's no further debate on the amendment, the question now occurs on the amendment offered by the ranking member. All those in favor shall signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed shall signify by saying nay. Nay, in the opinion of the chair, the nays have it. Recorded vote has been requested. All those in favor of a recorded vote shall raise their hand and be counted. A sufficient number having raised their hands, a recorded vote is so ordered, and pursuant to subsection C5 of Rule 3 of the committee rules, further proceedings on the amendment are postponed. Are there any further amendments or discussion? For what purpose does the ranking member seek recognition?
I have an amendment at the desk.
I see the gentlelady has several. Is this styled with a number or?
It would be number 4. Page what?
The amendment of the ranking member amending page 4. We will pause for a moment and allow that to be distributed. Is there any member who has not received a copy of the amendment? Not, the clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Ms. Waters. On page 4, strike line 1 through 33 and replace
Without
with
objection, the
following.
reading of the amendment is dispensed with, and the ranking member is recognized on her amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As a Democrat who fought for the passage of the Dodd-Frank Act, I believe that the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau was the biggest achievement of our financial reform bill. In response to a crisis caused by lenders who neglected their most basic responsibilities to their customers, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau was created by the Dodd-Frank Act to protect consumers from predatory practices and promote fair and transparent markets for the provision of consumer financial products and services. While many Republicans have been sharply critical of Director Cordray's tenure, we are thankful for the enormous task he has undertaken in building the agency that has already done so much to identify and end financial misconduct. The CFPB director has a broad mandate that includes consumer protection functions transferred from seven different federal agencies, and the authority to write rules, supervise compliance, and enforce consumer financial protection laws. Since the Bureau was established, it has implemented new rules for mortgage markets and prepaid cards, released comprehensive studies on student lending and mandatory arbitration in consumer contracts, and also successfully recovered more than $11 billion for more than 25 million consumers harmed by predatory and illegal financial practices. The CFPB receives its funding from transfers from the Federal Reserve. The CFPB's annual budget authority is capped at a percentage of the operating budget of the Federal Reserve Board. We will fight to preserve this funding structure for the Bureau, which puts it on equal footing with other bank regulators and ensures powerful Special interests cannot influence the important work. The Bureau is, however, accountable to congressional oversight, as evidenced by the Bureau's testifying before the relevant committees of jurisdiction 55 times since its inception. The Bureau is also required by statute to submit to Congress a semi-annual report and to make the director available for a hearing on that report before the House Financial Services Committee and Senate Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs Committee. Given the important mission of the CFPB to protect consumers, including minority populations, students, seniors, and service members, and the expertise required to monitor and regulate complex financial markets, Democrats expect the CFPB will adequately fund its operations in funding year 2017. For all of these reasons, I urge my colleagues to support this amendment, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlelady yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Move to strike the last word.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, just as we were talking about the previous amendment, same concept here is this is an agency that really has no accountability to Congress because of the structure of the way it's financed, takes money directly from the Federal Reserve. Now, a lot of people say, well, that means it doesn't have any budgetary implication, but what we've learned at the end of this last year is that when you do things to the Fed, you do have budgetary implication. And one of those implications is every dollar that the Federal Reserve gives to the CFPB is a dollar that then does not end up going to the United States Treasury. That's just the budgetary implication. But I think the other piece is that because of the lack of oversight and the lack of accountability in this agency, as the gentlewoman was referring to the fine money that has been collected and dispensed to injured consumers, what we're learning is that the CFPB has a difficult time doing that in the appropriate way, and that recently we found that they were actually giving money to people that had not been injured and was not doing the due diligence that was necessary. So there's a number of reasons why I cannot support the gentlewoman's amendment, but one is the lack of accountability to the American people, and secondly, the fact that it does have budgetary implication because the money that does not go from the Fed to the Treasury is money that the taxpayers have to borrow, and that will increase the federal deficit. And so with that, I'd like to yield to my friend from New Jersey, Mr. Garrett.
Thank you, and I'll just be very brief. Sometimes the small words are the important words. So if you read through the document, it's actually the almost next to last word in the last sentence where you say the committee expects the CFPB will adequately fund its operation in 2020. Expects is another word for hopes for, or you anticipate, or you think that they might. If you take the view that you do, that the CFPB is a great agency that has been doing good things and has a good track record, you leave it hanging here when you say you expect it to be that they will adequately fund their operation. As the gentleman from Texas just pointed out, there is no accountability from this entity. What happens if they don't adequately fund themselves? We have already had the CFPB before us, and we asked them, are you accountable to the president? They said no. Are you accountable to the Senate? They said no. Are you accountable to Congress? They said no. Are you accountable to this committee? They said no. Are you accountable to the Inspector General? They said no. So even if you take the position that you do, which we would disagree, that they are a good agency doing the right thing and have the right track record, what if they don't fund it the way you want them to? They're unaccountable to anyone and everyone, including yourself. By failing to put the CFPB under the auspices of Congress and the regular methodology that we use here as far as holding agencies accountable, going through the appropriation process, you just have wishful thinking that this agency is going to be adequately funded going forward. And if they don't do it the right way, as you would have them do, they are not accountable to you or anyone else.
So I think the little word here points out the fallacy in your proposition that they should be totally independent. They cannot be. They need to be accountable to someone, to those people who think they're doing a good job, and especially to the people who think they're doing a terrible job. I yield back to the gentleman from Texas.
I thank the gentleman. I yield to the gentleman, Mr. Duffy.
I appreciate the gentleman yielding. And I would just note on the accountability front, if you don't have accountability over someone's budget, I think it really calls into question what kind of oversight you have over that agency. On the Oversight Committee, we have sent numerous letters to the CFPB, and they just frankly don't answer the letters, or the letters they do respond to, they're non-responsive. We've actually had to take steps where we have tried to subpoena documents now from the CFPB, and even when we subpoena documents, they still don't provide what we request. And so I think it's important that we take a look at an agency that won't answer questions of this committee. It's one thing to say they come in and will, you know, BS us for 5 minutes as we ask them questions. It's another thing to actually get to the heart of the answers to the questions that we ask, and that's truly not happening. One of my concerns as well is if you look at the accountability they have to Congress and the budget aspect, there might be a different president who appoints a different director who that new director might draw a different amount of money from the CFPB that my friends across the aisle may not like. And I think it's incumbent upon both sides to say, hey, we should have in this committee, in this Congress, some say as to what the CFPB spends. I yield back.
Time of the gentleman from Texas has expired. Who seeks recognition? For what purpose, the gentleman from Kentucky seek recognition?
Move to strike the last word.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I join my colleagues in opposing the gentlelady's amendment. And I would encourage all of my members to co-sponsor legislation that I've introduced that I'm promoting called the TABS Act, Taking Account of Bureaucrat Spending Act, which would move the CFPB to be subject to congressional appropriations. We're the authorizing committee. We should have jurisdiction over the CFPB, and congressional appropriators should properly have the power of the purse over this agency. And whatever your views are on the work of the Bureau, if you're in favor of the mission of the Bureau or if you're opposed to the mission of the Bureau, I think as a matter of institutional integrity, all of us on both sides of the aisle should stand up for our institutional powers that are conferred to us as representatives of the American people in Article 1, Section 1 of the Constitution, which provides that all lawmaking power shall be vested in Congress, not in some unaccountable, unelected bureaucracy, which is what the Bureau is. If we truly take our oath to defend the Constitution seriously, then we should be promoting the powers that the Constitution gives us as the lawmaking branch. We shouldn't give those powers away to not only a director that is appointed by the president to just issue laws by fiat, but also because we take seriously our responsibility to the American people. And as it has been said, the budget of the Bureau is set through an opaque formula, and it's not set by members of Congress. That compromises our power of the purse because the power of the purse, the ability to appropriate, to plus up funds or decrease funds, that gives us meaningful oversight over this agency. And so clearly, the structure of the agency right now circumvents the democratic process because whatever the agency does, we're not accountable for it because the American people can't influence or support or oppose our positions on the appropriations that would support that agency. But as further evidence of the unaccountability of the Bureau, all of us should take note and be alarmed by the fact that the Bureau doesn't even follow the Administrative Procedures Act. Most agencies that are accountable, that are subject to the congressional appropriations process, they issue administrative rules and regulations through notice and comment rulemaking. Well, we have seen time and time again this agency not even following the basic requirements of the APA, issuing guidance, informal guidance, enforcement actions, ad hoc, without following any rules, so that the regulated parties don't even know what the rules are. And then you see the abuses in the spending of the agency, renovations to the office where The square footage of the renovations of the office costs more than the Bellagio Hotel. So what I would say to all members of Congress is whether you're a supporter of the mission of the Bureau or you find their practices to be abusive, let's stand up for the institution of Congress. Let's stand up for the power of the purse. Let's recognize that the American people can't hold unelected, unaccountable bureaucrats accountable, but they can hold accountable Congress, and we should have the backbone to either stand up for the agency or against the agency and reclaim our power of the purse. And what good, the ranking member in support of her amendment says that the committee has, or the Bureau has been before this committee 55 times since its inception. Well, what good is that if they're unresponsive? Director Cordray can come over here and testify, but that's really not meaningful if we don't have the ability, through the power of the purse, to exercise meaningful
Will the
oversight.
gentleman yield?
I will.
Does your bill include the Federal Reserve, the FDIC, the OCC, the FHFA, NCUA, or any other agencies that don't go through the appropriations process?
I'd be happy to answer the ranking member's question. My bill is focused on the CFPB because I believe that we need to do more.
But are you aware of the other agencies that don't go through the
I'd be happy
process?
to explore that if we can get this one done, because I think, and I supported the FORM Act, which holds the Fed more accountable, because I believe in more accountability of any of these agencies. The CFPB is a good example of unaccountability, and that's why I've focused on that. But you're exactly right to recognize that there are other agencies in the federal government that also abuse their power because they are not subject to congressional appropriations. So with that, I'd yield back the time that I have remaining, and I would support all of my colleagues to support the institution and support the TABS Act.
Time of the gentleman has expired. Who seeks recognition? For what purpose does the gentleman from Delaware seek recognition?
Move to strike the last word.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, as a co-sponsor of this amendment offered by the ranking member, Ms. Waters, and others, I'd like to first ask unanimous consent to enter into the record a fact sheet provided by the Consumer Financial Protection Board referred
Without objection.
Thank you. And I'd just like to encourage the CFPB. I've been talking to Director Cordray about rules and regulations that apply to short-term lenders and payday lenders in particular. These facilities are all over my district, particularly located in low-income neighborhoods in the city of Wilmington and other places across our state. Let me read briefly from the fact sheet that talks about an overview of the proposals for rulemaking that the CFPB is considering in this area. The proposals under consideration cover both short-term and longer-term credit products that are often marketed heavily to financially vulnerable consumers, and that is certainly the case in Delaware. The CFPB recognizes consumers' needs for affordable credit, but is concerned that the practices often associated with these products, such as failure to underwrite for affordable payments, repeatedly rolling over or refinancing loans, holding a security interest in a vehicle as collateral, accessing the consumer's deposit account for repayment, and performing costly withdrawal attempts can trap consumers in debt. Consumers can be forced to choose between reborrowing, defaulting, or falling behind on other obligations, and also may face deposit account fees and closures, vehicle repossessions, and other harms. The stark reality is that many of these facilities prey on these vulnerable populations because, in fact, they do need the money when a car breaks down and they need to have something fixed in the short term or whatever that short-term crisis may be. So these ideas for rulemaking include products like payday loans, deposit advance products, vehicle title loans, high-cost installment loans, open-end lines of credit, and other loans, and on and on. I would recommend to all of my colleagues on the committee this fact sheet and the work that the CFPB is doing, and I want to encourage them through this amendment and my sponsorship of it to continue the work that they're doing on the rulemaking as it relates to payday debt traps and other financial vehicles, short and long term, that prey on vulnerable consumers With that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back who seeks recognition. For what purpose does the gentleman from Massachusetts seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to strike the last word.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I would like to ask unanimous consent again that I might be added as an original co-sponsor to the gentlelady's amendment.
Without objection.
Thank you. The CFPB, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, is indeed the only agency whose singular, solitary purpose is to protect the American consumer. So it is ironic, I think, and somewhat instructive that my friends, my Republican friends, have continually attacked this agency. I remember back when we were trying to create this, my Republican colleagues tried mightily to prevent this agency from coming into existence. I remember those fights. And I think it was good for the American consumer that we created this agency despite Republican opposition. So I do want to point out that this agency does not require congressional appropriation, just as the Security and Exchange Commission doesn't require congressional appropriation. The FDIC doesn't require congressional appropriation. The OCC, the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, doesn't require congressional appropriation. The Federal Housing Finance Agency does not require congressional appropriation. The NCUA, National Credit Union Association, does not require congressional appropriation. So this is in line with all of those agencies. And I would dare to say that the reason that my Republican colleagues would like to have the CFPB subject to congressional appropriation is so they can kill it. They can kill it. That's the real reasoning behind this, and I oppose that. And I have wonderful, wonderful respect for the sponsor of the TAB Act. Respect him greatly, and will be interested in looking at that legislation. But I have to stand with the ranking member on this. I think she's got a good amendment. I think she's got the right priorities, and those priorities are of the American consumer. And with that, and with all respect, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. He seeks recognition. For what purpose, gentleman from Minnesota seek recognition? Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
I thank the chairman and ranking member. I would say this about the gentleman's description of the TAB Act, that it ignores the reality of our modern politics. The reality of our modern politics is that so often there's nobody to stick up for the consumer. The consumer is one of those kind of individuals in our society that's looking for a friend. Oftentimes the money that's taken from them or small amounts, it's hard to get a lawyer to stand up for you. And you need an agency that's going to stand up for your interests. And that agency, if you're small, needs to be somewhat insulated from the political ups and downs. I mean, if you have a pro-consumer environment, that's one thing, but usually what we have is a government and an economy dominated by incredibly wealthy people, and that has been increasingly true over the past several decades. We're at a point now where, billionaires run the place. They even run for president, I hear. And so the bottom line is, who's going to help the consumer if you don't have an agency like the CFPB? And by the way, the CFPB has done a good job. I mean, the thing that shocks me about this is that here we are, a few years after the most momentous meltdown in our economy since the Great Depression, and much of it due to bad consumer protection. And the one agency that emerged from that meltdown, the CFPB, is under constant pressure. But they've done a good job. I mean, in this document that I'm looking at right now, they've been able to approximately $10.1 billion is the approximate amount of relief to consumers from the CFPB enforcement activity, including $2.6 billion in restitution to consumers, $7.5 billion in principal reductions, canceled debts, and other consumer relief. That just wasn't happening before. Now, we can take some theoretical, high school civics approach to, separation of powers and all that, and it sounds great, but the reality is that without some insulation between the vicissitudes of the political cycle and who's in power and who's not, and the small consumer, that small consumer just doesn't stand a chance. And Exhibit A for me is the 2008 financial meltdown and the mortgage crisis. I'd also like to point out just another thing with any time I have remaining. I think earlier in today's discussion, we were sort of discussing another issue that I want to bring some attention to regarding the CFPB. I think it was represented that the CFPB was giving money to individuals who had not been harmed. I believe that the Republican report alleges that that is the case. If that's not true, please rescue me from my mistake, but I believe it is true. But there's no evidence that anyone who has not been an aggrieved party has received any kind of compensation or damages. In fact, the first payments from the Allied payment were mailed out last week, so there's really no way that anyone who could argue that they know improper payments have been made. Both the Bureau and the Department of Justice have said that that there are important controls that they have in place to make sure that this doesn't happen. And so I just want to set the record straight here that that this claim that the CFPB is giving money to unaggrieved parties is not without, it doesn't have any factual support. So with that, I'll yield back my time. Thank you.
Gentleman yields back. Who seeks recognition? For what purpose does the gentleman from Missouri seek recognition?
I'm going to strike the last word.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I won't take the 5 minutes. I want to, first of all, agree with the ranking member on this. And I would ask for some level of consistency. Probably no one in this room, no one on this committee can tell anybody here who makes the decisions on the highway projects in their own congressional district. The most significant injection of dollars into the economy usually comes through infrastructure projects, and yet nobody in here can give the name of the person who does it in their own congressional district. And we give the administration the ability to select projects on highways in our district and select just about anything else that goes on in our districts. But when it comes to consumer protection, all of a sudden there is some new energetic opposition. It seems to me that, consistency would say, the Congress of the United States ought to determine how the money is spent. And we ought to be able to dictate how the money is spent by virtue of being elected to Congress. When we had the NSP, the Neighborhood Stabilization Program, which originated here in this committee, and the dollars were allocated, when we looked at the map, Kit Bond and I, former Senator Kit Bond looked at the map, the NH dollars were spent on the East Coast, but there was not one single penny spent in Arkansas, Missouri, Kansas, Oklahoma, or Iowa. Not one penny. And there was nothing we could do. We had a fit. The senator and I had a fit over HUD. But the point I'm trying to make is that happens all the time, and it doesn't seem to bother us except with the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. I am irritated and offended that I can't tell you what projects in my district, and I'm the only one who gets elected to Congress. Somebody whose name we don't know, whose face we'll never see, who will never stand before the public, makes billions and billions of dollars worth of decisions that we are left looking at and hoping we get invited to a ribbon cutting by somebody else. So, I support the CFPB. I supported it when we first approved it. But today, I'm just trying to get people to just think just a tiny bit about the great inconsistency in opposing the CFPB, and then feeling real good and joyous over all the other things that we have absolutely no say about. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yells back, who seeks recognition. Chair recognizes himself for 5 minutes. I would hope this would not be a Republican or Democrat issue, that instead it would be an Article 1 of the Constitution issue, that we should not have agencies that essentially now serve as cop on the beat, prosecutor, judge, jury, and often recipient of the fine. That we have agencies that, for all intents and purposes, we have outsourced our legislative authority to. That we have agencies, for all intents and purposes, we've outsourced the power of the purse to. Now, the ranking member listed a number of agencies that have some of the attributes of the CFPB, and you know what? I think she makes a very good case. I think each and every one of these should be reviewed, and unless there's a compelling reason not to do it, I think all the ones within our jurisdiction probably should be brought on budget. So I thank the ranking member for bringing that to our attention. I hope we can have the necessary hearings in this Congress. I certainly have an open mind on the issue, but it's not an empty mind on the issue. Simply because something has been done for years or decades doesn't mean we should continue to do it that way. And so I'm sorry the gentleman from California on the other side of the aisle isn't here, because I know in the past he's made a very eloquent and cogent argument. Sooner or later, the White House is going to be in Republican hands. Sooner or later, Congress will be in Democratic hands, as much as it pains me to say that. And the shoe will be on the other foot. And so we understand that we have policy differences, but these are institutional and constitutional and foundational matters about agencies that ought to be accountable to we the people. And we happen to be the elected representatives of we the people. And I don't quite understand, listen, I guess to paraphrase Churchill, democracy is the worst form of government, save every other form of government. But we hear all of these critiques of democracy, that we have to essentially outsource constitutional authority to other agencies because we don't trust we the people. Again, that's part of the democratic process. That's why we hold elections. It's why in the House we're accountable to we the people every 2 years. So I just want to urge all members to reject the amendment from the ranking member. And if there was ever one agency, it's the Orwellian named CFP, possibly the single most powerful unaccountable agency in the history of the Republic. If there was ever one that was screaming out for being on budget, it is the CFPB, and I don't care whether they testify 55 times or 5,500 times. They're not accountable to we the people until they become on budget, until we regain our legislative authority over them. I yield back the balance of my time. Who seeks recognition? Is there any further debate on the amendment? If not, the question now occurs on the amendment offered by the ranking member. All those in favor shall signify by saying aye. All those opposed shall signify by saying nay. Nay, in the opinion of the chair, the nays that have it. A recorded vote has been requested. All those in favor of a recorded vote shall raise their hand and be counted. A sufficient number having raised their hands, a recorded vote is so ordered, and pursuant to subsection C5 of Rule 3 of the committee rules, for the proceedings on the amendment are postponed. Who seeks recognition? What purpose does the ranking member seek recognition?
I have an amendment after this.
Is it styled in a certain fashion?
Page 5.
The amendment dealing with page 5, we'll pause a moment, allow it to be distributed. Is there any member who has not received a copy of the amendment? The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Ms. Waters on page 5, strike lines 10 through 31. And
Without objection, the reading of the amendment is dispensed with. The ranking member is recognized now on her amendment.
Thank you so very much, Mr. Chairman. Before delving into this amendment, let me again thank you for holding this hearing. I think perhaps oftentimes it is not absolutely clear where we stand on some of these very important issues. But this Budget Views and Estimates hearing that we're having certainly does identify where we stand on these issues, where Democrats stand, where Republicans stand on these issues. And I'm just so pleased that we have the opportunity to take them one by one in the fashion that we're doing and have the opposite side of the aisle clearly articulate where they stand on these important issues. So, Mr. Chairman, the Securities and Exchange Commission is tasked with overseeing and regulating our nation's capital markets, and to do so must be fully funded. Our capital markets are vital to our economy, allowing millions of Americans to save for their futures and invest in job-creating businesses. But for those markets to function effectively, investors must have confidence that there is a cop on the beat, ensuring that the markets are well policed and fair. That cop is the Securities Exchange Commission, which oversees more than 25,000 market participants, implements rules of the road governing those participants, and enforces those rules to protect investors and preserve market integrity. As the complexity and scope of our capital markets has increased dramatically, in recent years the SEC's responsibilities have increased, requiring additional funds. It is important to note that the FEC is funded by small industry transaction fees, so fully funding the Commission is debt and deficit neutral, costing the taxpayers nothing. As you all know, the SEC has been working hard to implement the Dodd-Frank Act, which addressed gaps in the law that exacerbated the 2008 financial crisis and created a robust regulatory regime for the previously unregulated swaps market. Accordingly, the SEC now must regulate and oversee a major portion of the market for credit default swaps, an additional 2,500 exempt reporting advisors to hedge fund and other private funds, and 1,000 municipal advisors. Although the SEC has successfully completed 73% of the rulemakings contemplated by Dodd-Frank, additional funds will help the SEC to finish and enforce these rulemakings, as well as utilize additional authorities granted by Dodd-Frank. In particular, with additional resources, the Commission will be able to more quickly respond to the substantial number of tips it receives under its newly established whistleblower program. These tips provided by corporate insiders with firsthand information of wrongdoing enable the SEC to leverage its resources to bring enforcement actions efficiently and effectively. Through increased public awareness of the whistleblower program, the number of tips has increased exponentially. In fiscal year 2015, the agency received nearly 4,000 whistleblower tips, a 30% increase over the number of tips received in fiscal year 2012. These tips came from individuals in every state, as well as from 95 countries around the world, and they are already yielding considerable fruit, with the Commission currently tracking over 700 matters in which a whistleblower's tip has led to an investigation or assisted enforcement staff in an existing investigation. Since the program's inception, judgments or orders have been issued for more than 390 award claims, and whistleblowers have been awarded more than $50 million for providing the Commission with original information that led to successful enforcement actions. The SEC has also brought cases against firms for whistleblower retaliation and improper restrictions of whistleblowing activities and confidentiality agreements. To both better protect investors and inspire global confidence in our capital markets, it is imperative that the Commission further enhance this program, as well as its compliance and enforcement divisions. and Congress should do its part by fully funding the SEC. So I would urge adoption of this amendment. And Mr. Chairman and members, I have sat here with great interest as you have opposed everything from the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, and I'm anxious to hear how you are going to oppose full funding for the SEC to protect investors. This is get very interesting.
Time of the gentlelady has long since expired. For what purpose the gentleman from New Jersey seek recognition? Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
So, Mr. Chairman, I guess I would like to address two things, process and policy. Both I think are significant. On the process side, as you know, this committee hearing that we're having today was actually scheduled for last week, and due to the snow and what have you, it had to be postponed, and so we're doing it now. This means that the sponsor of this amendment had more than ample enough time to pre-file these amendments and deliver it to the committee and provide us with an opportunity prior today. But correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Chairman, we have not seen these.
If the gentleman would yield, no, we have not.
So the question is how serious really is the ranking member on this amendment and on any other amendments? How serious is she, or is she just simply playing theatrics on very important topics? If she and the other sponsors of the other amendments were truly serious about getting to the root causes of problems on our economic policy and on our financial marketplace, we could have had these a week ago or even before and had the time to delve into them. So let's get into the issue of moving from process to policy. You know, during this past week when we were home during the snowstorm, someone came up to me and asked me this very simple question: when is enough enough? How do you measure success? He was speaking not of what we're doing on the Republican side of the aisle, but he was speaking about on the Democrat side of the aisle. When is enough enough? Do you measure it simply by how much more money you put into a program? Do you measure it by the wealth that you extract from the American taxpayer? Do you measure it by the income that you take away from the retirees, the investors in the marketplace, and take it from their pocketbook, from their wallets, from their hard-earned cash, and instead divert it to government? Because that, in essence, is what your amendment is doing. You're taking it from the economy, you're taking it from hard workers, you're taking it from retirees, people who have worked their entire life, who have invested and worked, and now you're taking it from them and basically sending it to Washington. And so the question is when is enough enough? We have seen something of a fourfold increase in the spending for this agency with terrible results over the last several years. We have seen additional funds go into additional divisions of this agency without success over the years. Let me run down the terrible track record that this agency has had, much of it during the time that the minority was in power. The SEC failed to prevent the bailout of Bear Stearns. They failed to prevent the collapse of Lehman Brothers. They failed to prevent the largest investment banks from acquiring toxic assets. They failed to address the problems with the credit rating agencies. And of course, the biggest one, I can go on and on, but the biggest one we all know, failed to uncover the multi-billion-dollar Ponzi scheme run by Stanford and Bernie Madoff. This despite the fact their agency was continuously receiving more funding. We see an increase of 150 last year. We see a 100 million increase this year. The funding level that we're looking at right now is not some number pulled out of the air. It's not some austere, draconian number that Republicans came up with. I think you had an amendment earlier today. It points out the fact that the funding right now is essentially just about at the level that this administration had requested for the SEC. So you said you would be eager to see what the rebuttal is to this amendment. Well, the rebuttal is, when is enough enough? When you have an agency that has failed in its mission terribly over the years, despite having repeated increases in their funding, when you have an agency that the GAO reports has a culture of its employees that is low morale, distrust of management, compartmentalized, hierarchical, and high risk adverse in the organization. When is enough enough?
Will the gentleman yield?
Sure, for the last.
Thank you very much. I just want to ask you a question. Are you sure that you want to stand by the statement that you just made
Reclaiming my time. Reclaiming my time. I'm always sure.
I don't think you want to do that.
That enough is enough. We are spending adequately on the SEC. Now we just need the SEC to straighten out its operation and perform adequately.
Time of the gentleman has expired. For what purpose does the gentlelady from New York seek recognition?
To be recognized for 5 minutes.
Gentlelady's recognized for 5 minutes.
I would speak in support of the ranking member's amendment. Nothing is more important to this country than the safety and soundness of our financial institutions and the protection of investors and the ability for the system to work well and honestly and produce jobs and liquidity and a stronger economy. Even through the financial crisis, one of the things that the director of the economic advisors to the president testified several times, that one of the things that helped us dig our way out was that other countries, other individuals trusted the American economy and invested in it as investors. So protecting investors is incredibly important, not only for the investor, but for the respect and strength of our economic system. Now, the SEC is charged with protecting investors, and I would like to say in defense of her amendment that she's not pulling numbers out of the air. She's pulling numbers out of Dodd-Frank. In the conference report, HR 4173, on page 586, it says for fiscal year 2015, $2.2 billion more should go into helping the SEC make sure that our markets are honest and that our markets are fair. May I remind my colleagues that during the financial crisis, this country lost well over $18 trillion in assets, in economic strength. 4 million people lost their jobs. 6 million people lost their homes. It was a disaster of monumental proportions. And keeping a system honest and fair and working right, I think is worth a lot of money, because in the long run, it makes money for everybody. And we heard in front of the head of the Bureau of Labor Statistics, who was appointed by a Republican president, he testified that this financial crisis was the first one in history that was caused by mismanagement by the financial industry. It wasn't some outside war. It wasn't some outside disaster. It was fraud, mismanagement. We brought it on ourselves. And I, for one, want to support any effort that will help our regulators who were put in place to protect us and to protect the economy. And I would say that economic security is very, very much tied to the security of our nation. If we aren't strong economically, then our homeland security isn't strong. So I feel that this is a reasonable request. It is a request that is in law. It's not being pulled out of the sky. And I support her amendment, and I feel that we should support this amendment and support the ability of the SEC to do its job. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Who seeks recognition? There being no further, for what purpose does the gentleman from Massachusetts seek recognition?
I move to strike the last word.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
I thank the gentleman. And again, I would like to ask unanimous consent to be allowed to join as a co-sponsor on the gentlelady from California's amendment.
Without objection.
Thank you. Just in terms of the SEC, we've got a unique funding mechanism that allows the SEC to be funded through basically transaction fees. And Those were much higher at the end of the first Depression when Congress in its wisdom adopted this mechanism. It assigns a certain fee per trade, and that started back in 1939. However, since the volume of trades has grown exponentially, we've been able to drop that. So when is enough enough? In response to that question, we've actually been dropping the fee per trade over the past, well, since 1940. I think the question is an opposite, to be honest with you. I think that especially when we look at what the SEC is doing now, I don't know if you had a chance to read or have been following the SEC settlement with Barclays and others about dark pools. So a great piece in the New York Times this weekend, I think it was the Sunday Times, that these dark pools that assure traders and investors that they're going to protect them from high-frequency traders. They created these dark pools to say that you can trade privately, basically, and that you will not be exploited. Come into our pools. Well, what happened here is that Barclays has admitted, and others are being investigated as well, that they brought people into those dark pools, and then they invited the sharks in with them. And they allowed these high-frequency traders to take advantage of those banks, those customers, those investors. That's some of the work that the SEC is doing now. We need them to do more of it. I'm sure, I would bet that there are a lot more dark pools that are operating this way because of the complexity and the opaqueness of these markets. And so at this time, we really need to protect the integrity of our markets. And the SEC is the cop on the beat. And we should be supporting the gentlelady's amendment for all the right reasons. And with that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Is there any further debate on the amendment? If not, the question now occurs on the amendment by the ranking member. All those in favor shall signify by saying aye. All those opposed shall signify by saying nay. Nay, in the opinion of the chair. A recorded vote has been requested. All those in favor of a recorded vote shall raise their hand and be counted. A sufficient number having raised their hands. Recorded vote is so ordered and pursuant to subsection C5 of Rule 3 of the committee rules for the proceedings on this amendment are postponed. Is there any further amendments? For purposes, the ranking member seek recognition.
I have an amendment at the desk. This would be number 6.
Gentlelady has an amendment at the desk.
Page 8.
Page 8. We will pause a moment, allow it to be distributed.
I got it. Where is it?
Clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Ms. Waters, beginning on page 8, line 15, insert the following.
Without objection, the reading of the amendment is dispensed with. The ranking member is recognized on her amendment.
As we move forward with these budget views and estimates, and we have now seen opposition on FSOC, the Consumer Protection Bureau, investor protection, let us move to racial wealth gap. And I assure you, this has nothing to do with theatrics. This has to do with what people on this side of the aisle, the Democrats, care about and what we're willing to discuss and to get your opinions on. I was pleased to see what I believe is an unprecedented first, that the majority of views recognize that this committee has a unique obligation to those in need and that home ownership is imperative to addressing those needs. However, the majority's views only partially diagnose the issue. Our obligation to those in need does not end with middle and lower income Americans, but extends to specific needs of communities of color. Long-standing and systemic inequities continue to distort progress and opportunities for millions of Americans in this country, especially along racial and ethnic lines. Wealth in this country is intrinsically tied to home ownership. Disparities in home ownership stem from lasting injustices embedded in past federal policies. For example, the National Housing Act of 1934 legalized a practice called redlining, arbitrarily marking black neighborhoods as bad credit risks and effectively discouraging lending in these areas, all while black home buyers were simultaneously excluded from home ownership in white neighborhoods. Redlining was officially outlawed in the Fair Housing Act of 1968, less than 50 years ago, so it should come as no surprise that its impact in the form of residentially segregated housing patterns characterized by higher poverty rates, declining infrastructure, and lower property values persists today. Indeed, there are many seniors still alive today that during their working years were prohibited from buying a home they desired and could afford in a wealthy white neighborhood. With that type of pernicious discrimination, of course, the ramifications are still felt by their children and grandchildren. And while we contend with the shadow of redlining and exclusion, we are also still reeling from the devastation of the 2008 crisis. Predatory products such as subprime mortgages and no-interest loans, as well as the subsequent housing collapse, foreclosure crisis, and Great Recession all operated to disproportionately decimate much of the wealth minority families had fought to accumulate in spite of historical injustices. As a result, while some people have been able to fully recover from the recent economic crisis, African Americans, Latino Americans, Native Americans, and other historically disadvantaged populations remain significantly indebted. Currently, while white households have 15 times more wealth than African American households and 13 times more wealth than Latino households, largely stemming from the fact that while 73% of white Americans own their homes, only 47% of Latino Americans and 46% of African Americans are homeowners. Even for those that do own homes, wealth is still starkly divided. The average net value for African American homes is $50,000, and for Latino American homeowners is $48,000 compared to $85,800 for white Americans. Remedying these and other disparities requires more than reliance to slogans or simple ideologies. It requires an understanding that pragmatic, targeted federal policies are necessary. If the United States is to remain globally competitive as minority populations continue to grow, communities of color must have full access and opportunity to build wealth and participate in our economy. My amendment adds language to say that the committee understands that our obligation to those in need extends to communities of color, and that the federal government has an important role in solving such long-standing inequities that undermine the nation's economic security. Mr. Chairman, I'm dead serious about this. I urge adoption of this amendment, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlelady's time has expired. Who seeks recognition? For what purposes? Gentleman from Missouri seek recognition.
Strike last word.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We certainly appreciate the ranking member's amendment here from the standpoint that she is correct. We do have a problem, but I'm not sure that this is the correct approach. I think, what we've done with H.R. 3700 is begin the approach of looking at ways that we can empower the private sector through more flexibility with the Public Housing Authority and private housing authority folks to be able to use Section 8 housing vouchers in a better way. I think a lot of these things empower individuals, peoples, and other entities. You know, there's a statement in here that says, because, and it's in the second paragraph, because only the federal government can remedy the structural economic disadvantages that persist along racial lines. I categorically, disagree with that from the standpoint that only the federal government can remedy a structure that's in our society. Oh, come on now. This is something that has to be done within not just the governmental structure, but also our cultural structure. I think we've looked at a number of ways. And I know when we were in New Orleans, the ranking member and I, there were people there that testified at a committee hearing, and they talked about the different communities that were there and the culture of the people that needed to be there to be able to enhance the ability of folks to raise themselves up. So I think that calling it idealistic hope for universal self-reliance is some pretty fancy language, but I certainly am not, again, I think it's denigrating the fact that an individual needs to be at some point responsible for himself and his ability to raise himself up, as the people that we saw in New Orleans. If we remember a ranking member and members of the committee, we had a lady that we were visiting with in one of the housing authorities there, and she was so adamant about the fact that her parents wanted her to be able to, at some point in her life, own a home, and that she was wanting her son to be able to own that home as well. And to do this, they need to have a job. This was her goal. This was her life that she believed was important to be able to raise herself up. So, again, some of the alternatives that we're looking at here in the bottom half of this is certainly, again, it's a lot of superfluous language that talks about things that some of the reasons we got in some of the problems that we had in 2008 was, again, lax lending standards that got people into homes and that shouldn't be in homes and hurt them more than it helped them. And I think I can tell you as a former loan officer, sometimes it is difficult to say no to people whenever you know that person is well-meaning and they want to do the best thing, but yet you know they can't afford it. I've had this discussion with a lot of realtors over a 30-year mortgage. They'll say, well, we wanted to get somebody a 30-year mortgage. That's wonderful, but sometimes it's less than a 30-year mortgage is what they need to be in. Instead of buying a $250,000 house, they need to buy a $100,000 house because they can actually afford payments on that over a better period of time. So I think there's lots of things here that, I understand the gentlelady's concern with offering the amendment. I don't disagree with the underlying problems she points out, but I certainly think that there are better ways to approach this than what she's talking here and the things that she's mentioning in this. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Who seeks recognition? For what purpose does the gentlelady from Ohio seek recognition?
Move to strike the last word.
Gentlelady is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, I would like to associate myself with all the words of Ranking Members Waters, and I would like to be recognized to also seek unanimous consent to be added as an original co-sponsor to this amendment.
Without objection.
Lastly, I would like to say, being someone who has probably more than 2 decades of experience in working in housing, I don't disagree with my colleague on the other side's words when he challenged or questioned that only government. But let me add to this what my interpretation was of that, because maybe when I first read it and read only the words, but then I thought about when we were here and my Republican colleagues to a government entity challenged Richard Cordray with the CFPB when there were racial problems, and we dealt with them here. Had that been a private organization, it would have never gotten here. So I think when you look at the words and we say it's government, because we have systems in place. There are people every day who discriminate and do things in housing and come up with ways that go unnoticed and untouched. But the good thing, and you all set the standards. I've never seen you hit so hard on someone on some racial issues as you did when those witnesses came in here, and many of them Democrat witnesses. So I was waiting for the opportunity, since we care so much about racial discrimination, and I wanted to make sure that it was just not flowery words as someone was trying to imply that my ranking member was doing when she was bringing this up. Because I was surprised, to be very honest, Mr. Chairman, when I heard so many people standing up to be against racism and just going overboard on how awful this was. But then when it comes outside of an agency that we know you all have been against, I don't see that same kind of commitment. And I think this is one amendment that we should be able to come together on and not make this about Democrats and Republicans. Because what you know is, whether it is in an urban area or it's in a rural area, there are folks who discriminate against folks strictly on the lines of economics and on race and ethnicity. So I just want to commend the ranking member on her amendments and being willing to stand up for those folks who so often don't have a voice, and housing is probably one of our most critical areas, along with education and healthcare. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentlelady yields back. Who seeks recognition? For what purpose? The gentleman from New Jersey seek recognition.
Strike the last word.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
So last night was an interesting night in watching the election returns and the final speeches from the Democrat side of the aisle. You had, I guess, I'm not sure who actually won that, but basically both of them were at the platform saying, elect them and they will give us 4 more or 8 more years of what we've had over the last several years, since this administration's been in office. So I'm going to keep up the charts from the other side of the aisle. If we go ahead, please, to what they're professing to be a great improvement. No, keep it, go ahead. Go ahead. There we go. This is what they're saying has been so great during the Obama administration, and I guess both Hillary and Bernie will do more of this. Household wealth has increased more than $30 trillion, 17 trillion higher. The question that you should be asking yourself is, exactly where is that household wealth all going to during this administration and all of the policies this administration has been able to push through, and the Dodd-Frank legislation and so on and so forth? It's not to minorities and blacks and Hispanics. It's not to the middle class. It's going to the top 1%. 93% of wealth creation during this time since the recession has gone to the top 1% under this administration. And now we hear you would like to have 8 more years of that. Article in the paper a little while ago says during this administration, the wealth of white households was 13 times the median wealth of black households in 2013 compared to 8 times in 2010, according to Pew analysis. This is the biggest gap between black and white since 1989, when whites had 17 times the wealth of black households. So if you're suggesting that we need to do more of the same, you're really suggesting you're going to encourage greater disparity between whites and blacks, greater disparity between whites and Hispanics and other minorities. But I would say that's not the road we should be going. The wealth of white households is now more than 10 times that of Hispanic families, compared with 9 times in 2010. You want to go more in that direction? This administration has already done for this country? I think not. If there's anyone that has been trying to lay out a platform that would go to make sure that every American, whites, blacks, Hispanics, minorities, every category, middle class, actually see an uptick in their wealth, it's been the policies that have been promulgated from this side of the aisle. You know, if you go into a poor area, and you go into a deli or a sandwich shop or something like that and ask them, what is your biggest concern? What is your biggest problem? Tell us what you really want Washington to do. Do they say to you, we would like to see the 3rd and 4th quintile of a disparity level move to the 2nd or 1st quintile, and the 1st quintile move down to the 3rd or 4th level? I don't hear that. in my urban neighborhoods. They say, can't you get us a job? Can't you make it easier to get a mortgage? I finally went out and I started my own little shop, and now I can't get a mortgage because of Dodd-Frank. It's so complicated that they don't look at my track record and I don't have a good score. Can't you pass some legislation so that the business where I'm working at right now can hire more people, can hire my brother or somebody else and get more jobs there? Can't you actually do something so I can help myself? That's what they tell me they want, not changing this quintile to that quintile. You know, if you wanted to end income disparity tomorrow, you could do it. Take the top 1 quintile of Americans, move them all to South America. Then everything is more even. The 1% are gone, and everybody else is here. But would that have solved a thing? I think not. Now, you are correct in one regard, that the federal government is in the way and is a problem, and that, or rather, they can solve it. How can they do it? They can simplify the process. Congress can pass jobs legislation. We did it yesterday, Mr. Chairman. We passed 4 jobs-created bills out of this committee, onto the floor, into the Senate. They were all bipartisan bills. They were all job creation bills. We did it in a bipartisan manner. I think there was only one person from the other side of the aisle opposing those bills, and it might be the ranking member who was saying that we're not doing anything. Secondly, we can simplify the process for mortgages so people can actually get into that house, people who don't have good credit rating agencies, who work for themselves. We can get the Federal Reserve out of the way, where they're churning out the dollars, which basically lowers the interest rates, hurts retirees and their pensions, and also basically, again, kicks up the 1% into that 1% quintile. That's how the federal government can resolve some of these problems. I yield back.
Time of the gentleman has expired who seeks recognition. For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman, move to strike the last word.
Strike the last word.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
I believe that this amendment that Congresswoman Waters of California is offering is one that is necessary and should be a part of this bill. I believe that some of the solutions that she offers in the 3rd paragraph to accomplish this goal are excellent, but they should not be limited to ensuring accountability in the wake of the subprime and foreclosure crisis through fair mortgage settlements and relief programs and stricter enforcement of housing anti-discrimination and predatory lending laws. All that she is offering is something that would make it much easier to accomplish that goal. And to have her give further explanation to that, I yield back the balance of my time. I yield to Maxine the balance of my time.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman and members, I brought this amendment along with the other amendments that clearly define what we care about and the fact that we know that there is disagreement on the opposite side of the aisle. And I knew this would be a special challenge. I knew this would be a special challenge because it brings to the forefront public policy that has been designed, initiated, and supported by members on the opposite side of the aisle that exacerbate the ability of minorities and people of color to be able to hold on to their earnings and to be able to build wealth. And I knew that it would be vigorously opposed by people like Mr. Garrett because it would be consistent with his public policy and the way that he deals with these kinds of situations. Let me draw your attention to 2008. I think both sides of the aisle must know now that minority communities were targeted with these exotic products that basically encouraged people to sign on the dotted line for mortgages. Some, of course, they could not afford. But don't forget, in this targeting, what also happened was people of color were charged more in interest rates despite the fact that they earned enough money and paid their bills on time and deserved to have better loans. And when they compared them with whites who made the same amount of money, who paid their bills in the same way, who had the same kind of credit scores, they discovered that whites got better deals, better mortgages, better interest rates. And so that's the kind of public policy that I'm talking about that needs to be corrected, that needs to be dealt with. And let me just take a look at a bill that I just advised my caucus to oppose. That would be H.R. 766 by my friend, Mr. Lukemeyer. After the financial crisis of 2008, millions of hardworking people employed and homeless and destroyed trillions of dollars of their savings, federal prosecutors relied primarily on one tool to investigate and prosecute fraudulent financial activities at the largest banks. It's known as FIRREA, the Financial Institutions Reform and Recovery Act. And so the Department of Justice used FIRREA to secure historic mortgage fraud settlements like those against the Bank of America, $16.65 billion, Citibank, $7 billion, JP Morgan, $13 billion, and Goldman Sachs, $5.1 billion. These historic settlements would not have occurred if H.R. 766 were law. H.R. 766 severely limits the effectiveness of FIRREA, essentially inviting fraud on the markets. Specifically, the legislation says FIRREA cases can only be brought when fraud is committed against a bank instead of by a bank. H.R. 766 likewise limits law enforcement's subpoena power, making it much more difficult for Department of Justice to investigate potential crimes. H.R. 766 would be a major blow to the DOJ's ability to investigate financial crisis era crimes. And here we are talking about how wealth is stripped from minorities. And I pointed out to you, and everyone agrees and knows and understands that minority communities were targeted, but Mr. Lukemeyer has a bill that causes minorities and people of color not to be able to hold on to wealth and to be the victims of fraud. And that's what I'm talking about.
The time of the gentleman from
the kind
Texas
of
has
public policy
expired.
that we should be dealing with.
The time of the gentleman from Texas has expired. Who seeks recognition?
Mr. Chairman.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Massachusetts seek recognition?
I move to strike the last word.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
I thank the chairman. If the gentlelady would need a little bit more time, I would yield back to you. You're on a roll there.
Yes, but I will.
Okay.
I will
All right.
take some time later on, but
All
I'd
right.
like you to go
Okay.
right ahead.
All right. Thank you. Mr. Chairman, again, I would like to ask unanimous consent to be added to the list of original co-sponsors on Ms. Waters' amendment.
Without objection to order.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do want to speak on behalf of Ms. Waters' amendment. I think it is rightly focused. I have a city in my district, one of the major cities in my district, Brockton, Massachusetts, that is largely a minority city, large African-American community, and in particular, in respect to this amendment, it was the focus of many of the subprime lenders that went into working-class neighborhoods and offered products. They actually targeted the city of Brockton with subprime products so that the impact of the housing crisis was felt most dearly in cities like Brockton. People lost their homes. And a city that was moving in the right direction with a lot of potential, a lot of opportunity, a lot of working families, good schools, was caught in that vice of subprime lending, and a lot of people, a lot of good families, lost most of their wealth that was wrapped up in their homes. And we're still lingering in the city of Brockton with the impact of that crisis. Then on top of that, when the foreclosure process was in full swing. Again, those same families were abused by the foreclosure process that unfairly seized property or made greater assessments in terms of the payments that were required by those families who fought to stay in their homes. But the bottom line that I think the gentlelady from California's amendment here is trying to address that very situation. So on behalf of the families of Brockton, Massachusetts, and the rest of my district similarly situated, I am certainly in support of the gentlelady's amendment. And at this time, I would like to yield my remaining time to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Hinojosa.
Thank you. I ask unanimous consent that my name be added to the list of Congresswoman Maxine Waters' amendment.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you.
And I
Yield
could,
back to you.
Reclaiming my time, I'd like to offer additional time, my additional time to Ms. Waters, the ranking member.
Thank you very much. I appreciate having a minute or so here to respond to something that Mr. Lukemeyer said, implying that African Americans and people of color should be more self-reliant, that somehow people of color are at fault for not in some way being less wealthy or having less wealth than the majority population. And I take issue with that. I take issue with that because African Americans and people of color, Latinos, et cetera, work very hard, make less money, discriminated against more, but still hold this belief that America will be fair and will be just, and that government will look out for them. And so while folks are working 2 and 3 jobs, while people are still believing in the American dream, wanting to buy a home, and using whatever resources they have to try and achieve that, I dare say that they cannot be accused of not relying on themselves, not working hard enough, not caring enough, and not doing enough for themselves. So I just want to set the record straight that historically, people of color and African Americans have worked even when we got no pay. And certainly we have worked for less pay, and still we're working for minimum pay. And so this business about being more self-reliant is an argument that I reject. And with that, I will yield back the balance. I will yield the time back to the gentleman who yielded to me.
Gentleman's time is expired.
Yes.
Who seeks recognition? Gentleman from New York is recognized.
Move to strike the last word. Mr. Chairman, I just want to state that clearly, when you look at the gentlelady from California's amendment, it is basically just saying that we should make sure that equity is for all. And I don't think anyone can deny that minority communities were targeted during the economic crises, when in fact, most of those mortgages, the exotic mortgages that were given to people of color who had the same economic means of some others, but they were given lower rates, I don't think that that fact can be disputed. You look at communities of color, whether they're represented by members of the Congressional Black Caucus or members of the Hispanic Caucus, no matter where they are, as indicated by Congressman Lynch, in communities where there's pockets of people of color, those areas were targeted. There's no question about that. That's why you had the disproportionate impact. That's why you had folks losing the greatest amount of wealth. And that's why you further have greater disparities, because prior to that, we were making some gains, and the disparities were starting to close. But because of this crisis, we went back to where we were. And the reason why we began to make some gains at that time, because we were looking at what the federal government and the government could do to help to be assured, as a referee, kind of, that the right thing is being done. So when you think about, and I think about this economy, overall, there was, I think, some comment before Mr. Garrett was looking at some of the statistics on the board here. But I think it's undisputed for 8 years of George Bush. By the way, 6 of those 8 years was George Bush, a Republican House, and a Republican Senate. And that's when this country entered the greatest recession since the Great Depression. You had control for 6 of the 8 years. When Mr. Obama became president in 2008, he inherited the policies that the Republicans had put together. So heck yeah, we do not want to go back to that time. Clearly, when you had the complete majority, you could have done whatever you want. Did the economy get better? No, because for 8 years prior to that, when Bill Clinton was the president, we had some of the greatest prosperity of all times, and you saw everybody starting to move up on the economic charts. The only time that began to reverse is when you had control of the House, when you had control of the Senate, and when you had the President of the United States. I don't think any American wants to go back to that time. So yes, we've still got work to do, but it's undeniable that our nation is better placed. In fact, I can recall vividly, under the Bush administration, when the Secretary of Treasury came running to us saying the sky was falling, that it was about to end, everything would be over, not because of policies that was done by a Democratic president. And unfortunately, it took Democrats to even step up with a Republican president to try to save the country, based upon the request of George Bush and his Secretary of the Treasury. So yes, we don't want to go back to that. And we see substantial change and difference since 2008. And we want to build on that. And we want to make sure that everybody has a chance to live the American dream. I saw individuals, how I know some things were going wrong. Because if you look at some of those mortgages that were strong, they looked and they saw that they checked, there were no doc loans, etc. Most of the banks kept those. They didn't sell them. They knew when they got them what was good and what was bad. The bad ones, they knew already that they were selling them and they thought they could get something back in return of them. The strong ones, they held. Something is fundamentally wrong. We've got to improve it. This amendment makes that step in that right direction. I yield back.
Time of the gentleman has expired. Is there any further debate on the amendment? If not, the question now occurs on the amendment offered by the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Waters. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed say nay. Nay. Depending on the chair, the nays have it. The nays have it. The recorded vote has been requested. All in favor of a recorded vote, please raise your hand. A sufficient number of people have raised their hand, and the recorded vote, a sufficient number of Section C5 of Rule 3 of the committee rules, further proceedings on the amendment are postponed. Is there any further amendment or discussions? For purposes, the gentlewoman from California seeks recognition.
I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will distribute the amendment.
Okay. It's the last one. Homelessness, yeah, that's it. Yeah. Challenge, anyway.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Ms. Waters, beginning on page 9, line 9, insert the following.
Without objection, the reading of the amendment is dispensed with, and the gentlewoman is recognized for her amendment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. As we proceed with the budget views and estimates, it is quite clear where this side of the aisle stands on these important issues of facing our country. We have discovered that on financial stability, the opposite side of the aisle, the Republicans on this committee, are not in favor of supporting FSOC, who has the responsibility for making sure that they have the scrutiny and oversight for systemically important institutions to keep us from going back to 2008 into a recession. It's also clear that they would like to dismantle the Consumer Protection Bureau and deny it its independence. And surprisingly, they're not even concerned about investor protection, refuse to fund adequately the SEC, support the whistleblower program that is so effective in helping the SEC to go after folks who are in violation of the law. I never expected any support on the racial wealth gap, and of course, the opposite side of the aisle have shown that they could care less and prefer to talk about self-reliance rather than public policy that keeps this with wealth gap going. So now we're to homeless assistance. I don't know where the opposite side of the aisle stands on this, but I think at least, despite the fact they have been opposed to all of the other public policy that would be helpful to the citizens of this country, I'm hopeful that they will have some compassion for the homeless. Let me just start with my language here. My amendment adds language to the Republican budget views and estimates discussing the very concerning state of homelessness in America and how important it is that Congress pay serious attention to this issue. You included no language about homelessness in your views, Mr. Chairman. I'm sorry he's not here, but you know who I'm speaking to. And such an omission fails to accurately portray the seriousness of the emergency before us with respect to homelessness in this country and fails to recognize the clear need for additional funds to address this issue. I'm deeply concerned about the men, women, families, and youth who are homeless on our streets today. Homelessness affects the very fabric of our communities, and it is an economic issue as much as it is a social issue. The effects of being homeless are harmful beyond what most of us can fathom, and they are often extremely difficult to reverse. Homelessness diminishes the dignity of human beings, and it degrades the fundamental values on which our country is built. As a nation, we have made incremental progress in recent years towards the goal of ending homelessness in our country after a surge of new federal funding targeted towards veteran homeless started in 2008. But any incremental progress we have made has been woefully undermined by the enormous increases in homelessness in several communities across the country, especially in cities like New York and Los Angeles, where more than 1 in 5 homeless people in this country are located. According to HUD's latest point-in-time count, there are nearly 600,000 people experiencing homelessness on any given night in this country, 600,000 Americans. Despite coordinated federal, state, and local efforts to end homelessness among major cities, which account for 48% of all homeless people in this country, increased by 3%. Homelessness in some major cities has risen to crisis levels, causing them to consider declaring a state of emergency. Homelessness in Los Angeles, for example, increased by 20% From 2014 to 2015, Los Angeles also has the largest number of chronically homeless individuals than any other city. This reality is simply unconscionable. We all must do more. We have to do more to make sure that all homeless people have access to the affordable housing and social services that they so desperately need. We have to come together to educate each other about homelessness in our country. We have to have honest conversations about the challenges we face in working to end homelessness. And we have to stop making excuses for taking the steps that we already know will work. The federal government cannot turn a blind eye. Congress has a responsibility to the people of this country to provide everyone with safe, decent, and affordable roof over their heads. Early last year, the Democrats on this committee called for a series of hearings on homelessness crisis in this country. I sincerely hope that we can make this issue a high priority. We cannot afford to waste any more time, and hundreds of thousands of Americans are depending on us, and they're not homeless because they're not self-reliant.
Time of the gentlewoman has expired. Who seeks recognition? What purpose does the gentleman from Missouri seek recognition?
Strike last word.
You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. I think the gentlelady has, again, found a area that, as I stated in my opening remarks in the last amendment, that I agree that she's found a problem. And I don't disagree with some of her solutions. I disagree with some of the statements within this. And in fact, I think we can probably agree to most of this amendment other than probably the last sentence, which again gets the government involved in taking care of people rather than empowering people, which I think is what we need to be doing. And so we probably could take this amendment if you would strike the last sentence, 2 sentences, excuse me. But again, it's kind of interesting that you know, we're having this discussion here with regards to homeless folks and folks that we see are disadvantaged. Whenever in our bill 3700, we try to address some of this stuff. We did address some of it, and in fact had an amendment to help veterans, many of whom are disabled, are disadvantaged and homeless, as well as disabled who are homeless, and yet the ranking member voted against that amendment. So I think there's a lack of consistency here that is certainly discerning to me. But I think, you know, if the ranking member would consider striking the last 2 sentences, we probably could accept the amendment and move on. Mr. Chairman, I don't really have any other remarks. I think that, again, as I stated in the previous amendment, I think that we certainly have an issue here that's important. We need to address it. Our language in the bill text, or the bill text that we're looking at here, does that. If she wants to further elaborate on it, I don't have a problem with that. And I think deleting the last 2 sentences is something we.
Will the gentleman yield?
Yes, be glad to yield.
I'm trying to, and I maybe have missed something that you said. Exactly what is it what you would like to strike?
Well, on your amendment, the last 2, it starts with "and we have to stop making excuses." Those 2 lines at the 2 sentences at the end there are, 2 sentences.
So you would like to strike, and we have to stop making excuses for not taking the steps that we already know will work. You'd like to strike that?
Yeah, the last 2 sentences of this.
And then you'd like to strike, the federal government cannot turn a blind eye. Congress has a responsibility to the people of this country to provide everyone with a safe, decent, and affordable roof over their heads.
Mm-hmm.
And what would you like to replace it with?
Well, the language that's previous to that is something we would accept.
Would you not like to have any language that would assign some responsibility, any responsibility to government?
Well, I think throughout your amendment here, you're indicating that the government plays a role. Your second sentence, these funds provide state and local governments and public housing authorities, nonprofit organizations with funding for housing. It shows that there is some involvement by the government. But you're down here saying that the government is the only one that has responsibility for this. And I'm not sure that's the tone, number one, or the idea, number two, that we need to have in this document, is that Only the government can solve problems. Only the government is responsible for people. People have no responsibility, there's no other entity out there that can help them. And I think it goes a step too far. You take those two out, we'll take it.
If I may, I have no problems with striking, and we have to stop making excuses for not taking the steps that we already know will work. I have no problems with striking. The federal government cannot turn a blind eye. But I would like to retain and maybe modify somewhat is Congress has a responsibility to the people of this country to make every effort, I would include between country and to make every effort to provide everyone with a safe, decent, and affordable roof over their heads.
The chair is going to make a suggestion here is that if we could postpone consideration of this amendment and give the parties an opportunity to work out this language, we'll proceed on with the additional amendments and then come back to this amendment once those parties have had. Is there any objection
We're very
to
close.
that?
I think we're very close on language.
Without objection, then consideration of this amendment will be postponed and the committee will consider other amendments at this time. Oh, I'm sorry. What purpose is the gentleman seek recognition?
I wanted to speak to Congresswoman Maxine Waters' amendment.
Speak. Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
I want to speak, strike the last word. It's great to hear Mr. Lukemeyer mention some of the groups that were impacted by Mrs. Meek's amendment. And I want to speak specifically on the American military veterans who were greatly impacted during that tremendous financial crisis that we went into in 2008, because it was my fourth of 5 children, a girl by the name of Karen Hinojosa, a high school sophomore in Langley High School in McLean, Virginia, who heard one of the teachers talking at her Sunday school program about the suffering by the veterans who were homeless. And it was requested that the children in that class fast for 4 days so that they could understand what being hungry can be, especially for these military veterans that I'm going to speak about. And having had that experience and actually being taken to speak to the veterans here in Washington, D.C., in the streets of our nation's capital, she was really taken aback by what she saw. And she made up her mind that one thing that she could do was to ask her neighbors and relatives to donate cans of food. And she set a goal of 500 cans as a high school sophomore. And she met it within a 30-day period. The next year, as a high school junior, she set a goal of 750 cans of food for the homeless veterans. And again, she met that within a 30, 40-day period. And both times she had taken them to Martha's Kitchen, downtown Washington, D.C., specifically saying that they were for the military veterans. But she did more than that. As a senior in 2013, she asked 3 of her best friends to do exactly what she was doing, and each one met their goal and took all those cans of food to Martha's Kitchen. So if children can do something about this issue that we're talking about, homeless, poverty, and not having a home, surely Congress can do better than we've done in the past. So I strongly recommend that this amendment be passed, and without having to change it In fact, if you say that you want to change a sentence or two, that's up to the author of the amendment. But I strongly support this amendment and ask respectfully that my friends and colleagues on the other side of the aisle do the same thing. With that, I yield back.
Gentleman, yield back. Okay.
Yes, I yield back.
For purposes, gentlelady from Ohio, seek recognition.
Move to strike the last.
Gentlelady's recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I would like to ask unanimous consent to add my name as an original co-sponsor to Ranking Member Waters' amendment.
Without objection.
I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Who seeks recognition? Is there any further debate on the amendment?
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to ask unanimous consent that my name be added to Congresswoman Maxine Waters' amendment.
Without objection.
I yield back.
Is there any further debate on the amendment? Not the question now occurs on the amendment offered by the ranking member. All those in favor shall signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed shall signify by saying nay. Nay, in the opinion of the chair, the nays appear to have it. The nays have it. The amendment
Recorded vote?
Recorded vote has been requested. All those in favor of recorded vote shall raise their hand
Mr.
and
Chairman.
be counted. A sufficient number having raised their hand, a recorded vote is so ordered and pursuant to subsection C5 of Rule 3 of the committee rules. Further proceedings on the amendment are postponed. For what purpose does the ranking member seek recognition?
To make an inquiry relative to the last vote. To the homeless.
Okay, well, gentlelady.
Unanimous consent to.
Gentlelady's recognized for her inquiry.
Thank you very much. While you were absent, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Lukemeyer indicated that he had some problems with the last two sentences. In an effort to compromise and to work on this important amendment, I agreed to strike most of that and added one word that I thought would be acceptable to Mr. Lukemeyer and others in order to do something serious about homelessness. And are you saying that that is not acceptable, that that is not taken into consideration, that the my offer?
Does the gentlelady have a parliamentary inquiry?
Yes, I have a parliamentary inquiry.
Okay. Would you state your
Parliamentary inquiry is that while the chair was absent, a member of the committee made a statement and an offer and a suggestion, and the ranking member of this committee referred to and replied to that suggestion and offered to amend the language that he found objectionable. And while the chair was not privy to that information, I think that somehow when you have resumed taking over the chair, you ignored it. And so my parliamentary inquiry is, was it given legitimate consideration?
Well, the language was not amended. That would require unanimous consent. It did not receive unanimous consent. I would say to the ranking member and all others that your chances of being able to work amendments out with the majority are going to be maximized when you file them and with 48 hours as opposed to waiting to the last second. It's your option. If you want to file them at the last second, you can do that. In this particular case, because of the snow, you had 2 full weeks that we could have been working on amendments. So again, the ranking member has the privilege to file her amendment unseen until we actually
the gentleman yield?
I'd be happy to yield to the gentlelady.
The gentleman is referring to the filing of amendments, and the ranking member is following a procedure that is oftentimes followed in this committee and every other committee when there is an opportunity to have a consensus, to have people agree on a minor amendment. It can be taken up without any reference to previous filings and the rule that would apply under regular amendment filings. And so I wish that the chairman would not refer to this minor amendment, agreeing with a member on the opposite side of the aisle, as having abused a rule about the filing of amendments.
The gentlelady has not stated a parliamentary inquiry. Out of respect to the ranking member, I have engaged in this colloquy, but there is not a parliamentary inquiry in which to respond. Does any member seek recognition? For what purpose does the gentlelady from Ohio seek recognition?
Parliamentary inquiry, Mr. Chair.
State your inquiry.
My inquiry is, in the absence of your chair, there was a member designated to act in your stead. The member acting in your stead as chairman during this time accepted and even suggested for my colleague on the other side and the ranking member to cease their dialogue, and that he would accept if they could work it out at a later date. So my parliamentary inquiry is, does the person in your seat that you've designated have the authority as they have on calling us and everything else? Because it was not the two members. It was the chairman that stopped it and said, I would prefer that you work it out and we will bring it back.
A unanimous consent request had not been propounded at that time. So
May I finish? So then are we saying that because of the lack of the person that you designated in your chair and not either knowing who had some difficulty.
you have to have a unanimous consent request. There was not a unanimous consent
But he
request.
stopped it. We could have had that when the ranking member was getting ready to ask us for that. She said, then can I? He said, let's do this. You all are so close because my colleague on the other side said, I think they're there and we can do this. The chair interrupted the question of the unanimous consent to do it and made a ruling as the chair. He made the ruling as the chair when she was asking that. He stopped it in the middle of that. And everybody said, okay, because he was the chair.
Again,
So in
the
other
amendment
words,
was
the
not
failure
withdrawn.
of
The
the
amendment
chair
was
to
not.
ask her as you have done,
If
are
the
you asking?
if the gentlelady would suspend,
I'll suspend.
again, the amendment had not been withdrawn. It had not been modified by unanimous consent, and we just voted on and disposed of the amendment. Now,
Were you aware,
as-
Mr.
as-
Chairman, ask the question, were you aware of what happened in the chair?
well, that's not a parliamentary inquiry.
Were you aware that parliamentary practice had been established by a person acting in the chair?
The chair who is sitting in the chair has the authority and exercise the authority under our rules. I'm aware of no rule violation.
Will the gentlelady yield?
I'll yield.
Well, the gentlelady can't yield. It's not time. It's not her time
Whose
to
time is
yield.
it?
It was a parliamentary inquiry. For what purpose does the ranking member seek
I
recognition?
have a parliamentary inquiry.
If the gentlelady can state her parliamentary inquiry.
As the gentlelady from Ohio just stated, when Mr. Lukemeyer indicated that he was not happy with the last two sentences, and I responded saying that I was willing to strike the language that he was not happy with. And we were instructed by the chair at the time to go ahead and work on it, to continue with the rest of the business that we were doing, and then bring it back. It would be at that point that you would ask for unanimous consent. It was not ready for unanimous consent until it had been worked out.
Yes, does any member have wish to offer an amendment? For what purpose does the ranking member seek
I
recognition?
have a unanimous consent request.
State your request.
I have an amendment to my amendment to offer where I am striking the language in my amendment that reads, and we have to stop making excuses for not taking the steps that we already know will work. The federal government cannot turn a blind eye.
The
And I would retain
that portion that Mr. Lukemeyer had some problems with, that says Congress has a responsibility to the people of this country, and I modified that sentence and included between the word country and to make every effort to provide everyone with a safe, decent, and affordable roof over their heads.
There is no pending amendment at the time. If the gentlelady wishes to offer a new amendment by rewording a previous amendment that has been voted down by voice, the ranking member retains that ability and right. Who seeks recognition? For what purpose does the ranking member seek recognition?
According to the instructions of the chairman, I seek recognition to offer an amendment to...
We will pause for and allow the amendment to be distributed.
I'll run you some copies of that and we'll resubmit it as an amendment. And Mr. Reeves can go in the meantime.
He's going to wait for it?
No,
Just write down what you want and re-offer it. Then get copies made
I
and
need to make
re-offer it.
copies.
Okay, all right, okay.
We will pause while copies of the amendment are made pending distribution. Okay, is there any member who has not received a copy of the amendment? Clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Ms. Waters, beginning on page 9, line 9, insert the following. Hudson McKinney Vento Homelessness.
Without objection, the reading of the amendment is dispensed with, and the gentlelady is recognized on her amendment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I have an amendment to the amendment that I offered on homelessness to the budget views and estimates markup that we're involved in at this moment. Mr. Lukemeyer said that he had an objection to the last couple of sentences in the amendment. The objection that he identified was the sentence that starts with, "and we have to stop making excuses for not taking the steps that we already know will work." Further, the federal government cannot turn a blind eye. So I agreed to strike those sentences and to leave in place the sentence that starts with, "Congress has a responsibility to the people of this country to make every effort," I included, "to make every effort," in between the word country and to provide everyone with a safe, decent, and affordable roof over their heads. I made this amendment in an effort not only to recognize Mr. Lukemeyer's concerns, but to give this important amendment an opportunity to be seriously considered and not have politics interfere with an issue that's plaguing this country. When I inserted the words "make every effort," I modified my language significantly so that I did not place the entire responsibility on Congress, but to say that Congress would make every effort. And I think that is a serious attempt to address Mr. Lukemeier's concerns. It's also a serious attempt to allow those who have concerns about homelessness to have something to vote for and to vote on, and to send a message to this country that we are concerned not only about the men and women, but about the families and the veterans and all of those who are sleeping on our streets, sleeping under bridges, and finding life very difficult. One of the things that was mentioned to us just the other day by Mr. Ellison was that they have discovered that the children of the homeless do not do well in school. That is because they are moved around, they do not attend school regularly, and what we are doing again is supporting public policy, or not supporting the correct public policy that would avoid these young people being thrown into a life of hopelessness and poverty, a life where, as children who should be in school, are not able to be educated sufficiently so that they can grow up to have careers and to be competitive in our society. That's another way that you close the wealth gap, Mr. Lukemeier, is by ensuring that our young people are able to be educated, and already it has been determined that homelessness denies them that opportunity. And so this is a serious amendment, and I'm thankful that the chairman recognized that this amendment should be taken up. And despite the fact that he was not immediately willing to entertain the idea that there should be this amendment, by his backing up and taking another look and talking with staff and understanding more thoroughly what happened and what was done, allowed us to be able to take the amendment up and give everyone the opportunity to be on record to do something about serious homelessness in this country. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlelady yields back. Chair recognizes himself. I know the ranking member said she wanted her amendment seriously considered. I would say again, given that the ranking member has had 2 full weeks with which to work with the majority on the amendment, to only see the amendment moments ago is a funny way of approaching serious consideration. Again, the ranking member certainly has not breached any rule, but as I have said on numerous previous occasions, there are messaging amendments, and there are amendments that are meant to modify. Don't confuse the two. If you wish to modify and work with the majority, we would encourage you to file your amendments early so that we can work with you in good faith as opposed to amend these things on the fly. And again, there has been somewhere between 10 days and 2 weeks that the budget views and estimates have been out. Also note that the minority traditionally files their own views and estimates, their minority views. I encourage them to do so again so that their voice can be heard in the budget process. Otherwise, I'm disinclined to accept this amendment. I encourage its rejection. I yield back the balance of my time. Who seeks recognition? Is there any further amendment on the, any further debate on the amendment? If not, the question now occurs on the amendment offered by the...
Mr. Chairman?
For what purpose the gentleman from New York seek recognition?
Parliamentary inquiry.
State your inquiry.
So, by the chairman's ruling, are you saying that when we have markups,
Well, the chairman didn't issue a ruling.
Well, you indicated that that the ranking member should have 2 weeks ago submitted an amendment, with her amendment 2 weeks ago, and then it would have received recognition.
To respond to the gentleman, I also indicated the ranking member did not breach any rule, did not break any rule. All members are encouraged on the minority side if they wish to have their amendments seriously considered to get them to the majority as early as possible.
But
the
when
point
there's
what I was making to the gentleman, and this is, I don't think, in a parliamentary inquiry, again, there has been no rule breach. So if you have a question about how a rule is applied, that would be a parliamentary
My
inquiry.
question is whether or not members could make agreements to try to work together on both sides of the aisle on various amendments when we are having discussions at a markup.
Well, the short answer is yes. It's not a parliamentary inquiry. Again, members are encouraged to work with the majority as soon as their amendments are perfected. And so I'm not, again, there's no rule against it, but your probabilities of having your language incorporated is directly proportional to how much time the majority has to consider it. In this particular case, because we had a week canceled due to the snowstorm, members have had an extraordinary amount of time to look at the budget views and estimates. And again, this side of the aisle has an opportunity to file their own set of budget views and estimates, and I expect you to do so, and I would encourage you to do so. Is there, who seeks recognition?
I'm sorry, Ms. Beatty.
For purposes, gentlelady from Ohio seek recognition.
Parliamentary inquiry.
Gentlelady will state her inquiry.
First, let me say, not to prolong this, but for clarification on what just happened. Was the ruling in light of the previous statement, because when you vacated the chair and we brought something back that the chair asked us, and he used the words he would suspend where they were to bring it up at the end. Mr. Chairman, what you have done before in the chair on an amendment I have had. So I'm trying to get the parliamentary inquiry on where you just dismissed the language that we were working on. Was it because of a parliamentary ruling that we didn't get unanimous consents to delay it and put it as the 12th and come back, which we've done on amendments in markup? We have been in the middle of it. We've been working out language. We've gone in the hall, and you've used the same language that the chair, that was in the chair, said, let us suspend this. You all work it out, and I will add it to the end. So I'm trying to clarify, did you just not like it and we're not going to do bipartisan and you overruled it? Or is it overruled on that parliamentary procedure that you decided we failed, but you've used the same thing in previous cases in this hearing?
Again, the chair believes he's already answered this question, and we are presently contemplating the modified version that I believe that the ranking member wanted, and so that's what we are considering now. Otherwise, a unanimous consent agreement may have been contemplated, but one was not propounded. It was not offered, to the best of my knowledge. It was, according to the parliamentarian, it was never offered.
May I have a
further
follow-up?
debate on?
Yes.
For what purposes the ranking member seek recognition?
I would seek to inquire about unanimous consent. No, I'll just do it. I'll have a unanimous consent request for a quorum call.
Is the gentlelady demanding a quorum call?
There's no vote currently.
The gentlelady requested or to have a unanimous consent for a quorum call. I don't know that that should be characterized for whether or not it is or not a demand. I don't think that is the normal procedure. When a unanimous consent is requested, I don't think it needs to be identified whether or not it's a request or a demand. I simply have a unanimous consent request for a quorum call.
Is the gentlelady asking by unanimous consent, can she call for a quorum call? Is this a parliamentary inquiry?
The gentlelady requests a quorum call. Yeah.
Gentlelady has made the point that a quorum is not present. Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. McHenry. Mr. King. Mr. Royce. Mr. Lucas. Mr. Garrett. Mr. Nagelbauer. Mr. Nagelbauer, present. Mr. Pierce. Mr. Pierce, present. Mr. Posey. Mr. Fitzpatrick. Mr. Westmoreland. Mr. Lukemeyer. Mr. Lukemeyer, present. Mr. Huizenga. Mr. Duffy. Mr. Hurt. Mr. Stivers. Mr. Fincher. Mr. Stutzman. Mr. Mulvaney. Mr. Mulvaney, present. Mr. Holmgren. Mr. Ross. Mr. Pittenger. Mrs. Wagner. Mr. Barr. Mr. Rothfuss. Mr. Messer. Mr. Schweikert. Mr. Ginta. Mr. Tipton. Mr. Tipton, present. Mr. Williams. Mr. Poliquin. Mrs. Love. Mr. Hill. Here. Mr. Hill, present. Mr. Emmer. Ms. Waters. Ms. Waters, present. Mrs. Maloney. Ms. Vasquez. Mr. Sherman. Mr. Meeks. Mr. Meeks, present. Mr. Capuano. Mr. Hinojosa. Mr. Hinojosa, present. Mr. Clay. Mr. Clay, present. Mr. Lynch. Mr. Scott. Mr. Green. Mr. Cleaver. Ms. Moore. Mr. Ellison. Mr. Perlmutter. Mr. Himes. Mr. Carney. Ms. Sewell. Mr. Foster. Mr. Kildee. Mr. Murphy. Mr. Delaney. Ms. Sinema. Mrs. Beatty. Mrs. Beatty, present. Mr. Heck. Mr. Heck, present. Mr. Vargas. Mr. Chairman.
Present.
Chairman, present.
Clerk will report.
Mr. Garrett. Mr. Garrett, present.
Is there any other member present who has not indicated their presence?
Mr.
Gentleman from Texas.
Mr. Green, present.
Is there any other member present in the hearing room who has not indicated their presence? If not, the clerk will report.
Mr. Chairman, there are 15 members present.
We will suspend pending the establishment of a quorum.
Mr. Fitzpatrick. Mr. Fitzpatrick, present. Mr. Holgren. Mr. Holgren, present. Mr. Barr. Yes. Mr. Barr, present. Mr. Vargas. Mr. Vargas, present. Mr. Fincher.
Here.
Mr. Fincher, present.
The clerk will report.
Mr. Chairman, we have 20 members present.
Clerk will continue to call the roll.
Mr. Rothfuss. Mr. Rothfuss, present.
The committee will come to order. The clerk will report.
Mr. Chairman, we have 21 members present.
Chair notes the presence of a quorum. Is there any further debate on the amendment? If not, the question now occurs on the amendment offered by the ranking member. All those in favor shall signify by saying aye. All those opposed shall signify by saying nay. Nay. In the opinion of the chair, the nays appear to have it. The nays have it. The amendment is not adopted. A recorded vote has been requested. All those in favor of a recorded vote shall raise their hand and be counted. A sufficient number having raised their hands, a recorded vote is so ordered and pursuant to subsection C5 of Rule 3 of the committee rules. Further proceedings on the amendment are postponed. Are there any further amendments? For what purpose does the gentleman from New York seek recognition?
I have an amendment at the desk.
We'll pause and allow the amendment to be distributed. The clerk will report.
Amendment offered by Mr. Meeks on page 15, line 6. Insert the following: Community Development Financial Institutions Fund Amendment.
Without objection, the reading of the amendment is dispensed with, and the gentleman is recognized on his amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On page 14 of the views and estimate document we are marking up today has a section on ensuring economic opportunity for all. I would like to offer an amendment to this section to support the funding of the community development financial institutions because they are at the forefront of ensuring that individuals, communities, and small businesses that are left out of the economic opportunities get just a little support. And I believe that this is a good bill that I think that even my colleagues on the other side should want to support. The community development financial institutions, or better known as CDFI, by law, must dedicate at least 60% of its total lending to low-income communities and include several minority depository institutions, MDIs. focused on serving minority groups that have been traditionally and historically underserved by mainstream financial institutions. There are many areas that mainstream financial institutions are not there. CDFIs are housed within the Department of Treasury, and the CDFI fund provides financial assistance to CDFI certified institutions. The fund's mission is to expand the capacity of these financial institutions to provide credit, capital, and financial services to underserved populations and communities around the country. Through its administration of the New Market Tax Credit, the Bank Enterprise Loan, and other financial programs, the CDFI fund has invested directly in local communities, attracted billions of dollars in additional private sector investments. I think that is something my friends on the other side of the aisle like, additional private sector investments. And according to its last released annual financial report, since its inception, the CDFI fund has awarded more than $1.9 billion to CDFIs and allocated $33 billion in new markets tax credits. In fiscal year 2014 alone, CDFI program awardees reported that they provided over $195 million in financing to homeowners, businesses, and commercial and residential real estate developments, with over 70% of loans originating in distressed communities and to underserved populations and minority borrowers. Moreover, the fund supported the creation and preservation of 32,621 units of affordable housing for its All Affordable Housing Measure, a new market tax credit program allocates helped finance qualified investments of almost $4 billion in low-income communities. And at the same time, CDFI funding recipients successfully maintain solid and sound investment portfolio performance. We must fully fund programs that target underserved communities and provide support and capital directly to them. It is critical that we make the necessary investments to get people back to work, to empower local communities to develop their economies, and support community development financial institutions that are providing vital financial services to consumers left out of the traditional banking system. The CDFI fund is an exemplary of that effort, and we support its full funding for 2017. It is what brings communities together. It creates jobs. It helps small businesses. It helps housing for individuals who need it. And I think that we all should agree that wherever the economy is poor, CDFIs help hold communities together. And I would think that this is something that we should all be able to agree upon. And I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Move to strike the last word.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
I thank the gentleman for his amendment, and obviously this program has been beneficial to folks, but during this administration, the funding for this has gone from $107 million to $230 million. And if you look at it on a compounded basis, that's about a 13% annual compounded increase. And at the same time, though, the debts under this administration has gone from $10 trillion to now to $19 trillion. And so, there's a lot of worthy programs out there, and what we've got the responsibility of doing is, trying to give our children and our grandchildren a little bit of a break here and not, mortgage their future. I think this program has been recognized by the administration and this Congress have given increases to this program, but to just give them a blank check at this point in time, I would have to disagree with the gentleman and encourage my colleagues to not support this amendment. And with that, yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Who seeks recognition? If there any further debate on the amendment, if not, the question now occurs on the amendment offered by the gentleman from New York. All those in favor shall signify by saying aye. All those opposed signify by saying nay. Nay, in the opinion of the chair, the nays appear to have it. The nays have it, and the
Wait, Mr. Chairman, I request a roll call vote.
recorded vote has been requested. All those in favor of a recorded vote shall raise their hand and be counted. Sufficient number having raised their hands, a recorded vote is so ordered, and pursuant to subsection C5 of Rule 3 of the committee rules, further proceedings on the amendment are postponed. Are there further amendments? For what purposes, gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
We'll pause a moment and allow the amendment to be distributed. Clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mr. Hinojosa on page 13, line 25. And
Without objection, the
following.
reading of the amendment is dispensed with, and the gentleman from Texas is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk, and it is my pleasure to talk about it. Today I rise to offer an amendment that I will subsequently withdraw. My amendment underscores the importance of the North American Development Bank to the United States and to Mexico. I also wish to urge this committee to act on authorizing the bank's first request for a general capital increase since its inception in 1994, which is 22 years ago. The North American Development Bank, or the NAD Bank, which is what we call it, is a binational financial institution funded and governed equally by the United States and Mexico. The bank is critical to addressing environmental challenges along the United States and Mexico border and finances infrastructure projects that promote sustainable development and improves quality of life for the residents on both sides of the border. Moreover, this binational institution strengthens economic ties, our third largest trading partner and southern neighbor, which is Mexico. Since 1994, the NAD Bank has issued $2.4 billion in loans and grants and leveraged over $3 billion from the private sector for the financing of 206 infrastructure projects aimed at supplying safe drinking water, adequately treating wastewater, properly disposing of solid waste, and improving air quality through street paving and clean energy generation. The life-saving water and wastewater projects have benefited over 14 million people, many of whom have faced health-threatening conditions due to unsafe sources of drinking water. Many more have benefited from the NAD Bank investments in other sectors. Along with the border's region economy, the bank's lending portfolio has grown significantly in size and scope since 1994. Due to increased lending, the bank is now seeking to double its capital in order to sustain its current annual sustainable lending capacity of approximately $230 million. Without a capital injection, the NAD Bank's projected annual sustainable lending will drop to approximately $75 million annually at a time when there remains significant demand and need for infrastructure investment along the border. Strengthening the NAD Bank would be a clear demonstration of the United States' shared commitment with Mexico to build a stable and prosperous border region. As a valued and trusted institution on both sides of the border, the NAD Bank can continue to help mitigate high poverty rates and security challenges along the United States-Mexico border. I think it is critical that we convene a hearing on this matter. A hearing would give this committee an opportunity to explore the reasons for and the benefits of authorizing the bank's general capital increase, as well as provide committee members with a better understanding of the role of the Nat Bank in strengthening communities along the United States-Mexico border region. This time I'd like to yield to Mr. Pierce of New Mexico for 30 seconds, and he will speak in favor of the Nat Bank.
Thank the gentleman from Texas for yielding, and we do confirm that some of the most thorny, difficult problems to deal with are air quality, water quality problems that originate in and around the border. On the other side of the border, those problems don't know any restriction like a border. So NADB has completed and is currently working on projects in our district. It's a small institution, but it's one that falls under the jurisdiction of our committee. As with any government agency under oversight, we ought to be holding hearings to ensure that it's working efficiently and effectively as can be. And so I look forward to joining the gentleman and in this committee as we discuss the bank during the coming year. I yield back to the gentleman.
Thank you, Congressman Pierce. I look forward to working with you and the rest of our colleagues on this committee to ensure the Nat Bank has the resources it needs to carry out its mission. I thank you, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The time of the gentleman has expired. Did the gentleman wish to withdraw his amendment, as I understand it?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
The amendment is offered and withdrawn. Are there any further amendments? For what purpose does the ranking member seek recognition?
To strike the last word.
There's no pending measure.
I beg your pardon.
Okay, it's been offered and withdrawn, but by unanimous, without objection, the ranking member is recognized.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, for convening this markup of the committee's views and estimates on the budget for fiscal year. That is not the right one. Nope. Give it to me. The North American Development Bank is a binational financial institution created under the auspices of the North American Free Trade Agreement, that is NAFTA, to address trans-boundary environmental issues along both sides of the U.S.-Mexico border. Since 1994, the NAD Bank, often in conjunction with the private sector, has helped finance infrastructure projects aimed at promoting sustainable development and contributing to a higher quality of life, including greater access to drinking water, wastewater and hazard waste treatment, reducing environmental pollutions and contaminants, and improving roadways. Strengthening the environmental infrastructure along the U.S.-Mexico border is rightfully a joint effort, given that environmental problems don't end at national borders. For example, in the past decade, the NAD Bank helped the city of Tijuana build a comprehensive wastewater treatment program. Prior to that, Tijuana discharged significant amounts of untreated wastewater into the Pacific Ocean, and San Diego had limited means to stop the untreated wastewater from coming into U.S. waters. So residents on both sides of the border benefited from the NAD Bank's involvement, including over 1.6 million residents of Tijuana, where waterborne illnesses have been reduced by over 50%. I urge my colleagues to vote for this amendment in support of the North American Development Bank. It is well respected among states and communities along the U.S.-Mexico border, and it's had a tangible positive impact on the health and well-being of citizens, including boosting the property tax base for low-income communities in the United States and providing jobs to Americans and Mexicans alike. I should add that this amendment is also included as part of the minority budget views, along with language calling for regular order by the committee to consider the administration's request from last year's budget to authorize U.S. participation in the first capital increase for the NAD Bank since it was initially created in 1994. The last time this committee conducted any formal oversight or legislative activity with regard to the bank was in 2003. That was 13 years ago, under the leadership of Republican Chairman Mike Oxley, at which time the committee adopted a set of reform initiatives at the NAD Bank that had been agreed to between President Bush and Mexican President Fox
the year before. Again, I urge my colleagues to support this amendment and to focus our attention once again on the important role of the NAD Bank. In closing, having just invoked the name of our committee's distinguished former chairman, Mike Oxley, I want to acknowledge the appropriately kind words with which Chairman Henschelling began today's markup about our friend who recently passed away. Chairman Oxley was a friend, a skilled leader, a passionate policymaker. He had an adept ability to encourage members on both sides of the aisle to work together in the service of public policy and to help both businesses and consumers. For his legacy and for the example he set, he is to be commended. We will miss him, and I might add, we worked very well together. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlelady yields back. The amendment from the gentleman of Texas had been offered and withdrawn. Are there any further amendments?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
What purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
We'll pause a moment and allow the amendment to be distributed.
Thank you.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mr. Hinojosa. On page 11, line 16, insert the following.
Without objection, the reading of the amendment is dispensed with. And the gentleman from Texas is recognized on his amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise today to offer an amendment highlighting the magnitude of challenges facing our rural communities and the critical role of the federal government in expanding home ownership, building wealth, and providing opportunity to our most underserved rural communities. These rural communities across our nation face serious challenges. These are unique challenges compared to those faced by urban areas. The rural communities are 4 times more likely than urban areas to have at least 20% of their population living in poverty. To make matters worse, poverty in rural areas tend to be more persistent than in urban areas. For example, more than 88% of the nation's persistently poor counties, defined as having at least 20% poverty rate at each of the last 4 U.S. censuses, are rural, including many of the communities found in my own district. Residents living in rural communities have less access to the myriad of basic services and resources that exist in urban areas. First, rural areas have limited access to educational and employment opportunities, which contribute to lower incomes and higher poverty rates. Secondly, rural areas have less access to basic city services, including public works and social services, resources that are necessary for the economic health and well-being of a community. Third, rural communities have less access to decent and affordable housing. Consequently, far too many rural families live in housing that is unaffordable, in substandard condition, or both. According to the U.S. Census data, approximately 1.5 million rural homes, or about 5.9%, are in substandard condition. Sadly, I see these conditions all across my district and in the border region in communities commonly referred to as colonias. In colonias along the U.S.-Mexico border region, many families lack access to the most basic city and community services such as safe drinking water, paved roads, and electricity. Finally, rural communities are also beset by a lack of access to affordable housing credit. Those rural areas experience higher banking concentration than urban areas, resulting in less competition and consumer choice, higher prices, and ultimately less access to affordable mortgage loans. As compared to rural housing programs, local banks are often unable to provide low-income borrowers who may not have enough savings to contribute to a large down payment with the low-cost mortgages they need. For these reasons, our nation is fortunate to have federal rural housing programs that assist rural communities in accessing safe, decent, and affordable housing. For the last 60 years, the United States Department of Agriculture rural housing programs have been effective tools in helping low-income rural families attain home ownership and climb out of poverty. USDA's Rural Development Agency and Rural Housing Service are transforming lives. These federal programs have made tremendous progress in assisting rural communities in eliminating barriers to affordable housing, expanding homeownership, building wealth, creating jobs, and strengthening our most underserved communities. In closing, Mr. Chairman, I look forward to working with my colleagues on this committee to address the unique challenges and the needs of our rural constituents and to ensure a brighter future for them all. With that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Missouri seek recognition?
Strike last word.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think the gentleman has done a pretty good job with highlighting the concerns of housing in rural America. Somebody who comes from the rural area, his comments with regards to less access to a myriad of basic services that often exist in urban areas is correct. It's unfortunate that we have people who don't have access to running water, don't have access to electricity sometimes. It's frustrating. I know that the gentleman has been a leader with regards to rural issues and is trying to find a way to consequently address those issues here. His last comment here, the federal government plays a critical role in expanding home ownership. I think, we had a discussion a while ago with regards to the responsibility of government. Here he says a critical role, which I think is a better way to approach the government's way of going about this. I'm not crazy about the word critical. I think we need to have them involved in, but I'm not sure they need to be the only one. But I think at the end of the day, I think he makes good points with regards to the plight of rural communities and access to adequate home occupation. The other part that gives me concern here is with regards to rural housing in general. I know that the Rural Housing Agency we've had some meetings with those folks, and they certainly leave a lot to be desired with the oversight they provide over their programs. But I can assure you that's something that we're going to continue to want to monitor very closely. And I think he makes that point here as well. So I don't have a problem with what's presented before Mr. Chairman, and with that I yield back.
Do you yield to the chairman?
Certainly do.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. I want to thank the gentleman from Texas. I know that he has worked with the majority for several days on perfecting this amendment. I want to thank him for that, and so I also thank him for his passion, having visited the colonias myself. I know how desperate that situation is for many citizens in that area of the Rio Grande Valley and in his district. And again, I respect and appreciate the passion that he brings to the issue. Again, the language is not exactly what I would write myself, but it has been worked on by both sides in good faith, and I urge its adoption. I thank the gentleman for Missouri for his leadership in working with the gentleman from Texas. I yield back to the gentleman from Missouri.
I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back who seeks recognition. Is there any further debate on the amendment? If not, the question now... Okay, the question now occurs on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Texas. All those in favor shall signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed shall signify by saying nay. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes appear to have it, the ayes have it, and the amendment is agreed to. Are there any further amendments? For what purpose does the gentleman from Washington seek recognition?
I have an amendment on the desk, Mr. Chairman.
Well, pause for a moment, allow the amendment to be distributed. The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mr. Heck on page 4 at the end of line
Without objection,
9.
the reading of the amendment is dispensed with. The gentleman from Washington is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The language of this proposed amendment is fairly simple. It simply calls out the outstanding work that the people at the Office of Service Members Affairs at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau are doing, that office being led by the very capable Holly Petraeus. This is language which is verbatim identical that which was in last year's budget views and estimates and was unanimously adopted in the budget views and an estimate as an amendment the year before. I think it's important to note this work for a couple of reasons. The first of which is what they do is real important for the service members, the men and women who put on the uniform to keep us safe. And I especially think it's important to cite, frankly, as we continue to draw down post-Afghanistan and Iraq, because the truth of the matter is we continue to have people who do keep us safe, and they continue to need us to remember them. Secondly, I think it's a good reason to cite something that they have done recently, which is bring to our attention the fact that the protection against foreclosure for 1 year for separating service members has expired. As a consequence, as of April 1st, separating service members only have 3 months of protection against foreclosure. This is a situation which we think needs to be remedied, and when I say we, I mean Mr. Fincher and Mr. Stivers and I have joined in sponsorship of a bill to do just that. In the alternative, we may be coming up to any number of people reporting that our service members didn't have the time to get their financial affairs in order after they separated in order to continue to stay in their home. I believe that's, frankly, kind of a foundational protection that we ought to continue to extend to service members. And I'm very, very grateful to the Office of Service Members Affairs at CFPB for reminding us that that legislation had expired. I might add that the people and the organizations that support continuation of that protection against foreclosure include the Financial Services Roundtable, the American Bankers Association, the National Association of Realtors, and the Mortgage Bankers Association. So there is consensus in the industry that this is appropriate public policy, and reminding us that it is no longer the case was, in fact, something that the Office of Service Members Affairs did among thousands of things that they do day in and day out on behalf of the men and women who serve us. So as we did last year in the base text, and as we did 2 years ago by unanimous agreement, I would urge the members of this committee to adopt the amendment put forward by myself, Mr. Fincher, and Mr. Stivers. And with that, Mr. Chair, I thank you, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Who seeks recognition? Chairman will recognize himself. Indeed, we have seen this language before. The office has a noble mission. I hope and trust it is achieving that mission. I urge adoption of the amendment by the gentleman from Washington. I yield back. Any further debate on the amendment? If not, the question now occurs on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Washington. All those in favor shall signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed shall signify by saying nay. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes appear to have it. The ayes have it, and the amendment is adopted. Are there any further amendments?
I have an amendment at the desk.
The ranking member has an amendment at the desk. We'll pause and allow the amendment to be distributed.
Yes. So, are you suggesting I speak on these two amendments? Okay.
We have statements drafted up. And then for Mr. Ellison, I think we just say we're not going to be against, but we won't whip support.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay. And so can we tell people that we're going to be no's
Yes,
on the
yes.
Republican? Okay,
Mhm.
excellent.
Okay.
Do you want to go through the Dem ones, or are you good with the Democratic ones?
What?
Do you want to go through the Democratic amendments that we say you recommend a yes vote?
No,
or
no, no.
You're okay
Yeah,
with those?
yeah.
Okay.
Mhm.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Ms. Waters on page 15, add the following at the end, minority views.
Without objection, the reading of the amendment is dispensed with, and the ranking member is recognized on her amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Today's discussion has highlighted the vast differences between the priorities of our two sides. Democrats have heard the concerns of everyday Americans. They are tired of being ripped off and cannot understand why Congress would undermine the hard-fought protections in Dodd-Frank. They are tired of being discriminated against, and they can't understand why a country as great as ours can tolerate children, families, and veterans sleeping outside at night. Americans are not blind to the fact that wealth in this country is not held equitably, that deep historical, racial injustices persist even in 2016. This amendment, offered on behalf of all of the Democratic members of this committee, presents our views of the important work being done by the federal government and the work that still needs to be done. In this amendment, we highlight the numerous ways in which the Department of Housing and Urban Development provides resources to lower-income Americans, and especially those experiencing homelessness, but also detail why more funding is needed. We note that Democrats support the efforts of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau and the Securities and Exchange Commission to protect consumers and investors, and believe that both agencies should be fully funded. Our amendment explains the importance of the Financial Stability Oversight Council and the Office of Financial Research to our economy, as well as the need for our nation's megabanks to have credible living wills that allow them to fail without threatening our financial system or be required to downsize, become smaller and less risky. Democrats also believe that a central bank should be independent because this independence has been proven to promote a stable and healthy economy. And Democrats have not forgotten history, that the previous administration, a Republican administration, drove our economy off a cliff, driving millions into foreclosure and unemployment. That it was a Democratic Congress with a Democratic administration and a Republican chairman of the Federal Reserve that took the steps necessary to put our economy and financial system back together. And that for 70 consecutive months, our economy has created 14.1 million private sector jobs. This amendment demonstrates the fundamental difference between Republicans and Democrats, that in the richest country in the world, Democrats find it simply unconscionable that so many families struggle to access safe, decent, and affordable housing, that we believe our government entities play a crucial role establishing and enforcing rules for Wall Street, and that only the government can end the systemic racial injustices in our society. I urge adoption of this amendment.
Gentlelady yield back.
Yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlelady yields back the balance of her time. Chair recognizes himself for 5 minutes. After 8 years of the president's policies, we have the lowest workforce participation rate in a generation. People have simply given up. Middle-income families, I've seen their paychecks shrink. Average middle-income family losing about $1,700 in their paycheck. Their bank accounts are 10 to 15% less. After 8 years of this administration, we are seeing growth rates about half of what they should be, which means the family budget is not growing. Yet, as we see from the national debt, the federal budget continues to grow along. Free checking at banks has been cut in half. The ranks of the unbanked have increased. Increasingly, we are losing a community financial institution a day. I could go on, but the minority views, the last amendment is simply let's have more of the same. This economy is not working for working families. We've had 8 years of this. It must be rejected. I urge rejection of the amendment. I yield back the balance of my time. Is there any further debate on the amendment? If not, the question now occurs on the amendment offered by the ranking member. All those in favor shall signify by saying aye. All those opposed shall signify by saying nay. Nay, in the opinion of the chair, the nays appear to have it. The nays have it, and the amendment is not adopted. A recorded vote has been requested. All those in favor of recorded vote shall raise their hand and be counted. Being overly generous, a sufficient number having raised their hands, a recorded vote is so ordered and pursuant to subsection C5 of Rule 3 of the committee rules for the proceedings on the amendment are postponed. Are there any further amendments or discussion? If not, the committee will recess until 9 a.m. tomorrow, at which time we will vote on pending amendments. In the adoption of the budget views and estimates, the committee stands in recess until 9 a.m. tomorrow morning.